Right. We are live, but before we go,
this is the state of the nation. Ilifa Mugwanga. We are deliberate, we are reasonable, we are uncensored. The state of the nation with Henry Sully.
Right. Welcome to the State of the Nation. My name is Henry Sully. As always, before we start, we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto African Alumni Association operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across the Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I'm very excited to be here today, of course, because there are so many issues to talk about. There are several crises that Uganda has faced since the lockdown was unlocked, but even before that. Of course, the latest crisis is the fact that we lost one of Uganda's foremost economists, Dr. Tumusiime Mutebile, the governor, Bank of Uganda, who passed on this morning at 5:30 in Nairobi, Aga Khan Hospital, according to the news that we have received. But before that, we also know that there is the fuel crisis. So we shall be talking about the fuel crisis. I have also received many questions regarding pregnant learners. And of course, the recent return to school after 88 weeks lockdown in Kampala, where students in nursery schools, primary schools, and secondary schools were at home. So we shall be discussing that as well to see how, to question, to interrogate whether government planned well before unlocking or before sending back students to schools. How ready were those students? Do they have access to counseling as they return to school? And we are likely going to talk about the tuition spike, of course, especially during these days when many either middle class or lower income families are struggling because, first of all, they want working full time, but also because they likely have so many children to take back to school. We shall also talk about the notion of freedom of thought. What does it mean to have freedom of thought? Can we have good thinkers if they cannot think freely? Can we have good writers if they do not have the right or the spaces to think freely or express themselves? We shall talk about that. Of course, we shall talk about our colleague, Mr. Kakwenza Rukilabasaija, who was arrested. First, he was kidnapped, then he was later arrested by court and sent to jail. So we shall talk about that as well. But first, my name is Henry Sully, and this is the State of the Nation. Today we have Dr. Jime Spire Sentongo, we have Dr. Stella Nyanzi, and of course, David Kajova engaging in this discussion. Our colleague, Mr. Julius Mitala Muzukuru wa Mswangali, is on an assignment, and he will tell you when he returns to the State of the Nation. He probably won't be around for the next couple of weeks, but when he returns, he will tell us what he has been up to and what he is going to bring back to the table. Of course, we're going to miss him on this panel. I'm pretty sure he would have loved to be part of this panel. He's probably somewhere watching and probably wishing us good luck in this conversation. I am delighted to be here today and be without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers, starting with Dr. Stella Nyanzi. Welcome back, Dr. Stella. Welcome to Europe. I hope you're excited to be part of the diaspora, officially part of the diaspora. Again, you have been part of the diaspora before as a student, and now you are returning to these spaces. You know very well how to engage with these spaces, and I hope you are excited to be back. Welcome to the State of the Nation. How are you feeling? What's going on?
All right. Thank you very much, Henry. Thank you for convening us again. I'm delighted to return and to return in the presence of mighty thinkers. The two gentlemen with me today are amazing people whose thoughts I don't necessarily always agree with, but I respect and honor. And I think part of what excites me about participating in the State of the Nation is our ability to disagree, have hot, furious debates, but remain civil, remain in relationship and communion, because I think what differentiates civilized minds from those that are uncivilized is the ability to disagree and to still respect each other. I'm delighted to be back. The last time I tried to log in as a panelist, I was in Uganda and the internet was terrible. One of the things I appreciate about being in resource-endowed countries such as Germany, where I'm going to be based for a little while, is the ability for the public services and amenities to cater even for the poorest of the poor. And so I'm glad to be back and have access to the internet. And I just want to clarify the air and say that I'm in Germany as a scholar of what is known as the Writers in Exile program of PEN Germany. And so I'm not here necessarily again as there's also speculation that I'm here seeking citizenship, trying to forsake my Ugandan citizenship. I still carry my Ugandan passport quite proudly. In fact, I'm one of the few Ugandans who are still holding on to this older version that says Republic of Uganda. I still resist churning and getting the East African one, which is mandatory by April. I think it will be illegal to carry the kind of passport I'm carrying. I hear they're going to be phased out, but I am still very much interested in Uganda and the issues of the politics, the governance, the economics, the social aspects of Uganda. I love Europe because of the freedom that I can exercise, the freedom from fear, freedom from punishment, freedom from reprisal. And that is to be enjoyed because currently in Uganda, those of us who are particularly critical of the government know that there is always the fear of reprisal, the fear of penalization, even the fear of those who condemn us simply because we refuse to praise a regime that has failed. I want to join Henry in condoling with the family of Mutebile, Emmanuel. I will reserve my comments and criticism of his refusal he's refused to copy Museveni. He's a total replica of Yoweri Museveni in as far as clinging on to power and position. He reminds me of Mahmoud Mamdani, who was a professor at the university, who was my boss and refused to retire when he was past 65. I wonder what's happening in regard to other institutions that are affiliated with the government. Is it possible for people to retire, or do they wait for fate similar to what Mutebile has gone through. So I commiserate with Ugandans and condole with the family of Mutebile, and I celebrate those who have any achievements, particularly parents who have been able to take their kids back to school. Thanks for convening us.
Thank you so much again for joining this conversation. It's always a pleasure to have you at the State of the Nation. We really learn a lot from you, and I'm pretty sure very many people are excited to have you back. Mr. Kajoba.
Thank you, Henry, for having me once again. It's a great honor and an absolute privilege to be joining with great minds, Stella and Jimmy. It's a delight for me to share this space as we try to make sense of some of the pertinent issues that are going on in our country. And of course, I want to join Stella and the rest of Ugandans as we recognize and celebrate the life of the now late Professor Innocent Mutebile. When someone passes, usually in our African Ugandan context, I want to be very specific. I don't like to talk about Africa as though it were a monolithic, kind of thing. But at least in my culture, we don't say anything negative about the dead. But whether they're negative things to say or positive things to say, we need to remember that a family has lost a loved one. And so for that reason, we share their sorrow and condolences to the people of Uganda, and of course, those who are very connected to the now late. I look forward to the conversations that we're going to have today, and thanks for having me, Henry.
Welcome once again to the conversation, and always appreciate you as well. A pleasure to have you back. Dr. Jimmy Spire Sentongo, he doesn't like being referred to as doctor, even though he's a doctor. He doesn't want to be referred to as professor, even though he's a professor. He prefers to be plain Jimmy Spire Sentongo. How are you? Unmute yourself. Today we're muting.
It seems I can't unmute.
There you go.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
No, I hadn't muted myself. It was you. You're somehow trying to pass it up. Yeah, anyway, I'm happy to be with you this evening. Meeting, I've never been on a panel with Dr. Stella, with Kajoba. Yeah, I'm happy to be part of a panel with you to discuss such important matters. And I'm also glad that you've invited me again. This is my second time on this forum. Well, I wouldn't say that I'm the most informed or the one that would be the best place to discuss such issues, but I take it as a privilege and an opportunity when you invite me back again onto the program. So I appreciate that. About the issue, the passing of Mutebile, the late Mutebile, I also condole with the family. Kajoba just said that in our culture we don't say anything negative about the dead. I would join him in that, but I'll also have to add that usually in most of our funerals there is a drunkard who will say certain truths, and that drunkard is often sent by someone. So while we might say that it's culturally unacceptable, within the culture there is a provision for that. I might not be the drunkard for tonight to say those truths about Mutebile, but I'm happy about those things that he contributed to the country. But I would also join Dr. Stella in observing that I think the so many years that he served wouldn't have been really so. He would have sat aside to not groom. I don't want to use the word groom. It's a problematic one in our context. But at least to see someone else do the stuff that he has been doing, or maybe even doing it better than him. And second, I don't know how we shall eulogize Mutebile. I'm quite sure it's going to be mixed. Many have said that he has been a very good man, and maybe that's true. He has been good individually, but there will always remain that question, how a good man can accept to continually work for a problematic government, and especially working for it when he's totally quiet. I don't know whether he, in his privacy, raised issues about some of the things that the government he has been serving was doing. But I think that's going to be part of his legacy, much as it said that he was a good man as an individual. Yeah, once again, I'm happy to be part of this forum. Thanks for inviting me.
Welcome back. Once again, I think this is your third time actually on this platform.
Third actually.
So we are very delighted to have you on a regular basis whenever we want to discuss pertinent issues. Of course, the issue of Dr. Professor Emmanuel Tumusiime Mutebile is the latest crisis, and whichever context that we are going to be discussing him going forward, besides the eulogizing, is going to be in regard to how we move forward. How do we manage this crisis? Because we did not just lose Dr. Tumusiime Mutebile. We have lost the governor, Bank of Uganda, during an economic crisis, if you will. We do have a fuel crisis, and of course that affects all other sectors of the economy. Now that we have lost the governor, Bank of Uganda, how are we going to manage this crisis? And I want to play a clip that he a few things that he said in 2012, I believe. 2012, and I must say that in later years, I think he did want to retire, but he was not given the opportunity to retire. But in 2012, this is what Dr. Tumusiime Mutebile Emmanuel said.
Here for the long haul. There is nothing that will take me out of this seat except maybe God. And therefore, the markets should not worry about the rumblings in Parliament.
All right. You heard that. Was he right? Was he prophesizing? Is it called prophesizing? Or predicting his future? He did predict his future. Indeed, he died, the governor, Bank of Uganda, of course, leaving us in a crisis. How do we manage this crisis, especially given the other circumstances that are apparent right now? The fuel crisis. Of course, students have just gone back to school. And of course, we do have that kind of crisis as well. And of course, when you look at the COVID pandemic and how it has affected the economy of Uganda, was this the right time for the governor to die, to get away from us, to die from us? That's a pretty much literal question. I don't think anyone has an answer to that. But Mr. Kajo, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts on why it was the right time for him to die?
About the crisis, because I think we are in a crisis right now. We have just lost the governor, Banco. Imagine losing the lead of the Federal Reserve in the United States. How would the markets respond? So I guess my question is, how do you think the markets are going to respond Monday morning when we return to work? How should the markets? Because in 2012, he was telling the the markets to relax. I'm not going anywhere unless God decides to take me. I am not going anywhere. I'm going to stay here. So the markets should be stable. They shouldn't panic, thinking that someone else is going to come and replace me. Now we're not even thinking about replacing him while he's still around and can still come back and advise. We have lost him completely. How should the markets Monday morning, how should they respond?
Well, I am no economist, so I won't comment on how markets should respond, but I'll do what I know how to do best. And that is try to share some of my musings. First of all, for markets that need the assurance of a certain governor for his, it should be a very problematic market if its survival and functionality is tied on the presence of a specific individual as governor, especially when that individual is temporary, and like all human beings, the switch can be turned on off at any time. So first of all, I find that very problematic. Now, of course, markets, the little I know about them is that they have life and they react to things, you know. And I can't sit here and somehow suggest that the loss of someone such as Mr. Mutebile is something to be taken lightly. But if the Bank of Uganda, and I'm not saying it is going to happen, I want to think that the Bank of Uganda has institutions in place to ensure functionality. I am a big believer in institutions and the health of institutions. If an institution cannot function without its head, then that is a dead institution in that sense. And so I don't know the facts around Mr. Mutebile's health and eventual death. I know I have had a few times when he's been pronounced dead, and in fact, just before, there have been questions: is he dead indeed, or is he dead this time, or is he not dead this time? But if he has, because when you hear those continued rumors of someone is dead, and usually they tend to suggest that maybe someone is a bit unwell, or their condition probably causes such statements to be made. And so I would like to think that the Bank of Uganda, an institution as important as that, should have institutions in place where it can ensure continuity of functionality beyond an individual. And again, this brings us back to the reality of our country, Uganda, this sense of individuals embodying entire institution, as though the institution is somehow limited to this particular individual. So for example, when we speak of the presidency, for many people, the presidency is, by definition, is the president. You know, for many people, again, Bank of Uganda, by definition, is Mr. Mutebile. But I do know, at least for the time I was in Uganda, I knew at least 10 people who worked in Bank of Uganda in different capacities, you know, and they told me they worked with very many people. So an institution is bigger than an individual. Now, of course, we know through history and that usually the markets tend to react to occurrences like this. But for me, if there's anything I'm taking away from the passing of Mr. Mutebile, may his soul, you know, rest in peace, is this notion that certain individuals are the ones that hold the fate of the country, that certain individuals are the ones holding the fate of our institutions, and without them, these institutions do not have life. Now, for a situation like this, like has just happened, The next coming few days are going to help us discover whether this theory is actually true. We are about to find out if this hypothesis is something is intelligible and it does hold. We're about to test the cogence of the hypothesis that without the visionary leaders of our public institutions, our country is in turmoil. So the next coming couple of months are going to tell us a lot about this theory and how it functions. Now, I want to think, and I like to think, that there are so many fine, educated, gifted people who can run the Bank of Uganda, especially because it has to have policies, it has to have streamlined, I want to think so, systems in which it operates. And for that, I don't think we'll have a problem replacing a governor of the Bank of Uganda. But of course, in the short run, there was going to be a little bit of what one might call a mini crisis, of course, of who is coming up next, the continuity, the transition, and of course, depending on how the departed governor was functioning, and again, we'll find out in the next couple of days, how easy it will be for the next person to take up the reign and proceed with the programs and policies, especially at a time like this when Uganda needs to recover, first of all, from the effects of the pandemic that have affected the entire world, Uganda not excluded. And again, the just recent challenges that we're having of, like we'll discuss later, the economic crisis in terms of fuel prices in the country, and of course, tuition and everything, as we'll discuss it. So I am not worried. I am not really concerned in that regard.
Dr. Stella Nyanzi, endowooza eri etya?
Munnaye endowooza yange, ndowooza ngenda kubeera omutamiivu mukulu Spire gwayogeddeko, kubanga wadde ndi mukyala Muganda naye ate ndi munnauganda. So I suppose for me, I want to begin with Kajoba's statement about his belief in institutions, because an institution for 21 years failed to retire this person, right? 21 years, according to Wikipedia, which I quickly read, Mutebile has been governor of Bank of Uganda from 2001 until his death in 2022. That's 21 years, okay? He was born in the 40s. If Museveni was born in the 40s, similar to my father, these are people who are in their 70s plus, if indeed it's 40s and not 30s or 20s. And so institutions in Uganda, public service, government institutions have got a human resource policy, which I know about, which you all know about. There's a retirement age. Well, how is it that Uganda has had a governor for 21 years, a governor past his retirement age that we all know about? And so my first sort of drunk woman's incision into Mutebile's death is to question the viability of our institutions in Uganda. And I think for me, the question of patronage, Museveni's patronage, Museveni's appointment, Museveni's nepotism, Museveni's familial rule, and how it has abused and eroded and corroded public institutions in Uganda has to be, is cast in sharp relief when we consider Mutebile's tenure for 21 years. He has died in power, fulfilling Idi Amin dictatorial declaration of life presidency. So this has been a life governor of the Bank of Uganda. And for me, that is not acceptable. Right. So I think that following from that critique of an institution that has a human resource policy, a public service in Uganda that has a human resource policy, a country that has a retirement policy for people who are of age. I want to relate that to the abuse and the rape of our constitution, where the life presidency was reintroduced with the lifting of the age limit of Yoweri Museveni and any presidential candidate. And I think for me that the writing has been on the wall that those who abuse power in Uganda will not stop to abuse it, right to the point of the institutions. In Uganda, ekyennyanja kiduda kutandika na mutwe, kitwe kyekisooka okududa ku ngege, kigege kiduze. Mutebile is just another symptom of the rot arising from patronage and nepotism in our country, right? Is it his problem as an individual? Is it a crisis of the elite? Is it a crisis of those who have power? Those are questions we have to be asking, and we should not shy away from asking, right? I don't want to pretend that I'm an economist, but we have a lot of other professors and doctors and credible, able Ugandans who could have taken over. That point has been made already. I think the question about our economic crisis in Uganda is a question that ties in very cleanly with the political crisis that we have. We cannot abuse or separate our economic crisis from the political crisis that we have. A crisis of leadership, a crisis of governance, a crisis of management. And so questions about will the central bank, will the Bank of Uganda be able to operate? What are the functions of Bank of Uganda? The one that I learned in primary school was to ensure that there is confidence in currency. Very simple, that Ugandans can be bold in our belief in our currency, okay? Perhaps you're not as bad as Zimbabwe, where we heard that they carry wheelbarrows of money to buy bread using Zimbabwean dollars. Perhaps you're not as hopeless as the kwacha that was used in neighboring Congo, but we're slowly getting there, that the devaluation of our money, whether or not Mutebile was governor, whether he was alive or not, our money was quickly losing the confidence. I know about stories of the Musevenis and those in their armpits printing money and minting money, particularly to sustain patronage during elections of 2021 and 2016. How can Uganda have individuals minting money if we had a credible Bank of Uganda? And so I think for me that a leader of an institution who is working to service the dictatorship and the mismanagement of the dictatorship should die. It's good he died. He died too late. In my opinion, because these Ugandans are not serving the interest of everyday Ugandans. How does Mutebile's being alive serve Ugandans whose finances were taken away, yet there was a lot of borrowing during the time he was there? Why did we have to borrow so much and accrue so much more debt during the COVID-19 times? So of what use are the caliber of elite educated professors? He has a PhD from Dar es Salaam, I understand, a PhD in economics. He has a master's from Oxford. He also has another bachelor's degree from the University of Durham. How useful are his degrees in terms of what the Ugandan currency and everyday poor Ugandans have been going through? And so kitalo nnyo kitalo ddala nti afudde naye alyokanga n'afa ne tubyogera kuba bwe tutabyogerako atugasizza ki? Of what use has Mutebile and others such as him who've had 2 decades working side by side with a dictator? Of what use have they been to us? For me, these are questions that have to be asked unashamedly, and it doesn't mean I don't grieve with his family. But ebyokungubaga tubiteeke ku bbali tuleme bikozesa nga excuse kubika nsanafu na amasira tugabye amayute gawone Uganda ewone. Thank you very much.
This is the state of the nation. Ibifa Mugwanga. We are deliberate, we are reasonable, we are uncensored. The state of the nation with Henry Salu.
Right, welcome back. My name is Henry Sally. This is the State of the Nation. Again, we are discussing the late Dr. Emmanuel Tumusiime Mutebile, not as a person, but as an institution. We are discussing him in the context of Bank of Uganda and the markets in Uganda. So with all due respect to the family and friends of the late, we are discussing this in the context of an institution as Bank of Uganda, as well as the markets. Dr. Spire, your thoughts? We don't hear you. We don't hear you. For some reason, we don't hear you. We don't hear you, Dr. Spire. Dr. Spire, do you hear us? Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Say this. Do this if you hear me. Do you hear me? We don't hear you for some reason. I'm not sure why. Why not? Why not?
How about now?
Yeah, now we do hear you, yes.
All right. Yeah, like I said at the beginning, I really I'm sad, and I condole with the family of Mutebile. I know how it feels losing a family member, and for them, of course, they must be in mourning now. And it might sound a bit insensitive if they hear us talk some of the things we are going to say or we have said about Mutebile. But at the same time, I understand that knowing that their person was a public figure of his standing, given the position that he occupied, I don't think any of what is currently being said is really surprising or shocking to them. They must have expected that such a thing is to happen. But at the same time, there are a number of feelings that you have to balance. There are the feelings of those that have been close to him. There are also the feelings of the so many that feel that they are being affected by the system that he has been part of, and also affected by some of the things that he has done well for some positively and others negatively. I said at the beginning that he has been eulogized as a very generous man, as a very humble in some regards. I've questioned in some instances, we are saying that Mutebile was generous, but generous
Your network is not very stable at the moment. Do you hear us? We've missed, we have
picking.
We missed a few sentences back.
From what and allowances.
Correct.
Hello?
Yeah, so we have missed that. I think the last paragraph that you shared.
Oh, it's unfortunate. I'm the only one this side. One can judge from the quality of the network.
Right.
Yeah, so I was saying that many have been saying that he was generous, but that generosity could have been on our resources. We are not quite sure. And that tells a bit about our doubts, our misgivings, the suspicions about the handling of national resources. There seemed to be quite a mix that one would never be sure where the funds were coming from. Those for the elections 2016, 2021 that Stella has talked about, but even when we talk about individual generosity, there's so many pledges. You see the president making the gifts here and there. You're not quite sure where it's coming from. So it's not, I think, it wouldn't be right to be so quick to give credit to the generosity without questioning the context and where one is getting that money from. There is a popular case in ethics, which is my academic field, a case of someone who used to steal from the rich to distribute to the poor. And the question often asked, yes, Robin Hood, and it's often asked, was he right in his actions or wrong? And maybe this is a different case of someone stealing both from rich and poor to distribute to the needy and also those who are not needy. So I don't want to comment much about that. I didn't know much about Mutebile as an individual, and I wouldn't want to discuss his personality even if I knew anything about it now. The reason we are talking about him is mostly because of the position that he occupied and that it has a bearing on our own lives. These are policy issues. So we cannot we can't go back to culture and say that by our culture standards, we should be quiet now. In your question, you asked whether there is going to be a crisis now that Mutebile is dead or not. Should we be worried? I don't think there is going to be a crisis in terms of a crisis being caused by his death. We are already in a crisis. But if by crisis you meant that occasioned by his death, I don't think so. For quite some time, just basing on what I've been hearing in the news and other sources, I think he has been unwell. And I don't really think he has been in charge. The president has kept him there for all these years for whatever reason. I'm not quite sure what it was. But you can't say that he has been charged for the last maybe about 6 years. There are other economic fixers. There are people in Bank of Uganda who are still in position to do both the right things and those that they have to do to help the government keep in power, to play the cards of government. I think we would worry about a crisis if it was a sudden death of the president, because we know as we stand now that our state is mainly grounded on what the president prefers, what the president would want to be done or not to be done. In so many ways, I think Mutebile was serving the purposes and the interests and the preferences of the president. Maybe there are many things he would have wanted to do differently that he wouldn't in that position, given the kind of state that he was serving. By saying that, I'm not trying to absolve him of whatever, yes, to exonerate him of whatever wrongs he could have done, because there was a choice of not accepting to serve. There was a choice of standing aside. But by the time you accept to continue operating within something misfunctional, operating within something that you know is problematic, you have accepted to take responsibility. So I know in many ways Mutebile was playing the cards of the president, on whom much of what goes on in the country now depends. So I don't expect any crisis. You remember the time when Mbabazi was dropped as prime minister, and many had said, this is a super prime minister. He's the one who advises the president, and without him, this thing cannot move anywhere. When he was dropped, what happened? So I don't think I should worry in terms of economics. I should only keep the worries that I've been having, the worries that are occasioned by the system, not by the presence or absence of those who are simply placed in positions as pawns to play whatever the one who holds real power would want them to do. When Dr. Stella mentioned that Mutebile became governor in 2001, I had not followed up on that detail. I just remembered that in 2001, I was in first year undergraduate. First year. Since then, I've acquired 4 degrees, Mr. Mutebile has still been the governor of the Bank of Uganda. It's unbelievable. Yes, as some have said, he was brilliant. He was a talented man. I don't think Uganda has run short of brilliant people. I don't think Uganda has run short of economists. There must have been a replacement, even a better one, of Mutebile. But even if there was no replacement in terms of the exact characteristics of Mutebile, there must have been someone who could do the work that he was doing. Him being kept in that position all this time, as I said earlier, I don't know for what reason, but I don't think it was appropriate. And when we are appreciating him, the appreciation should not be tagged to the length of the time he has served. It should have been shorter than that. It should be tagged to what he was able to do when he was still productive, but also where the blame should go or where the fault should be placed is where we think that he should have stood down long ago for someone. I know there are many other people, like I said, all I've been able to study in that period. There are many other people who have studied even much beyond what Mutebile could have studied. Economics is a very dynamic field. Some of those people are still stuck to old economics, and maybe partly the problem, the reason we are faced with the problems we are faced with. Every time you hear the president quoting an economist, it's who is this old economist of the 18th century? Adam Smith.
Adam Smith.
And you know that de facto is the one in charge, and you keep wondering if we are still on Adam Smith. That's what our president is still fixated to in 2021. And maybe even Mutebile, I don't want to question his knowledge, but I still think that there are sharper economists who have since come up that should have served, especially in that time when he was frail. I last saw him about 7 years ago when he was making a presentation somewhere, and he was already very frail. So I can't imagine the position at which he has been at in 2021, 7 years later. Yeah, we shall miss him. I will not say like Dr. Stella, that good riddance. We shall miss his presence as a human being, but perhaps as a blessing in disguise, we should see new blood there, which again, I should not place so much hope on, knowing that it's still within the same system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Spire. And I must say that at some point during his career, before his demise, he was under investigation by, I think, the board of directors for the Bank of Uganda for, I think, there were 3 extra pallets of content that came with money from abroad that was not accounted for. They didn't know exactly what were in those pallets, and he couldn't explain it when the board, one of the board members, was questioning what was in those pallets that came with the currencies from abroad. As you know, we do not make our own currencies; we make it from abroad. But during that shipment, I think there were 3 extra pallets that came with the original ordered currency, and I couldn't account for those pallets. I think that investigation is still ongoing. I'll have to make more digging to find out how it ended and what really was in those pallets. But we do have Chris Mann, who is joining us from Facebook, is watching us on Facebook. He has asked very critical questions regarding the same. He says, I have read some rankings in which ATM is Dr. Emmanuel Tumusiime Mutebile, was ranked very highly among the greatest economists on the African continent. He says, but how do we explain the devalued currency, the negative curve of unemployment, high cost of capital, the fuel crisis are all indicators of the non-functional fiscal regime presided over by ATM. If If this be true, then his departure, whether by God or man, is not only timely, but long overdue. Do you agree with Chris? David, I know you said you're not an economist, but I wonder if you agree with Chris.
We're not here to agree. But
We're here to discuss.
Yeah, well, Buana Chris is sharing some interesting information. When I was younger, in light of what when he said that he was governor till 2000, from 2001, I remember
2001, I know.
In one of my primary level examination, they used to ask us who is the governor of Uganda, and I once said it was innocent Tumusiime Mutebile. So you can imagine how long ago that was. I'm currently undertaking my fourth degree, and he has been still governor. So that can tell you about the length of time. But a few years ago, in our young men banter, we had something we used to call scone theory. The kind of theory, the way we used to explain it, I won't talk about the where it came from because it's not very appropriate for such an intellectual conversation. But I'll get to its value. Basically, if you find yourself in a situation when all the shirts in your closet are dirty, but you have to go somewhere, well, you tend to look for one amongst the dirty shirts that is clean according to the standards of that which you have in your closet. So I don't know which body this was that ranked him as one of the finest. Probably it is true. I don't know because, like I said, I don't know the man, but it is likely that he's given the dire financial situation the economic situation of the country, perhaps according to their assessment, it should be worse than it actually is. And so probably because on those grounds, they say, well, he's doing a tremendous job. But also on the other hand, it is likely that the bar is set too low. So the tendency of so-and-so is the finest this, so-and-so is the finest this. Anyone can publish anything. And so simply because someone is ranked so high in a certain category might not necessarily speak to the, and also in terms of rankings, we get to look at the quality. I mean, what was the yardstick for this ranking? What was the basis for this ranking? So I can't speak about the rank because I don't have information about what the basis was, who did the ranking, what did they consider, which kind of economists were they considering? Were they measuring those who are in positions such as that Mr. Mutebile was, holding? So I don't know. So I can't speak to that. However, it is true to recognize that the situation we're in Uganda in terms of our economy is really disturbing. I think was it Stella and again Jimmy talked about our currency. I once went to Tanzania, so we were driving through basically. So when I crossed the border, I made an exchange of the money that I had, but I didn't exchange all of it. So I exchanged the portion that I felt would be enough for me. And so I proceeded. Then I go through Kenya and I at the border of Kenya and Tanzania, I realized that I needed more money. And I still had some Ugandan currency. And so I wanted to do an exchange. And I exchanged some of it there. However, it was very difficult to actually, because everyone was just making fun of me at the border point. It was that bad. I was at Namanga border. So I proceed and reach Dar es Salaam, and I realized I needed more money because it was a vacation trip across East Africa. Sometimes you spend more than you planned. So when I was in Dar es Salaam, I go to a forex bureau. I did not find a single forex bureau that could take Ugandan shillings, not even one.
Wow.
I had to, because everyone was just, they could ask me, which money do you have? I give them, I have Ugandan shillings. Like, oh, I'm not taking that. What am I going to use it for? I was asked this not at one, not at two, but 3 forex bureaus in Dar es Salaam. And I was frustrated. I had to turn to a friend who borrowed me some money, and I would refund when we returned to Uganda. That is the status of our currency. Even our neighbors cannot accept it. Now, I don't know what would happen if you were in Nigeria or somewhere else. But I was advised that if ever you're coming to these countries and you have Ugandan shillings, make sure you exchange it at the border point. When you go beyond the border point, they will give you any money they choose. They give you any exchange rate of their choice, because according to them, Ugandan money is of no value. Now, of course, that is overstating the case. It is not of no value, but in their assessment, it is so low in value that for many of them, they would rather not conduct business than take this particular currency of Uganda. So the situation is bad, and like Chris, I am hard pressed to understand, But again, recently, a few years, I think it was last year, when I saw some politicians in Uganda being recognized as performing very highly in what you would call reputable reports. So I am not one to look at rankings such as that and to conclude that because they've said someone is this, is therefore that. However, I also have no basis necessarily to argue against that ranking, because I do not know what their yardstick was in that regard.
In the same context, I must say that Chris said that his departure was long overdue. Mr. Chris Namakola thinks that even though Mr. Enos Tumusiime or Emmanuel Tumusiime Mutebile was reputable or regarded as one of the foremost economists in Uganda, I think he had worked enough, and he should have left long time ago. But I think we should delve into the fuel crisis. I know, Dr. Jimmy, you have been, Mr. Spire Sentongo, you have been engaged with this conversation. Many people say that it started as a crisis for testing drivers, truck drivers who are driving the fuel to Uganda, and then I think there was some kind of demonstration, and they just stopped entering into the country. Why don't you tell us some background on how this became a crisis and how much it has affected Ugandans and perhaps some parts of East Africa?
Yeah, thank you. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Well, I wouldn't really speak as an authority in terms of what exactly has caused this crisis. I think the information I have is as good as yours, because all these have been bits and pieces that you get from the media, social media, or sometimes you hear the Prime Minister say something maybe by accident, or a minister, and sometimes contradicting each other. So I don't have any information that I can call reliable. I've not even been on the ground of, let's say, at the border. But what I would say about the fuel crisis, one, this has been steadily developing over time. From, I think, around November last year, fuel has been on the increase. The prices have been going up. And I remember one time on the Frontline program on NBS, the minister Baryomus was asked, when does government come in to intervene when such things happen? When prices become unbearable? Of course, we understand that we are a liberalized economy, as many of them are so quick to say every time they're asked about prices. But even when you're a liberalized economy, you cannot entirely put everything in the hands of the market. There should remain certain things, that government can control. So every time he was asked, he would say, there is a threshold which not until we get there, government cannot intervene. And he was asked, what's that threshold? He did not really point at any particular figure. He was talking about a threshold in terms of fuel prices. Now, recently, when the prices went as high as in some places 6,000, 5,900 for petrol,
10,000.
he said that we had reached the threshold. I don't know where exactly it is up to now, but it appears this was just an excuse to run away from responsibility, or at times when they don't have a clear answer, that's what they can come up with. There has been the question of fuel reserves.
Yeah.
I think this is from around 2005 or 6 when there was another crisis. This came up and government was asked if there was any fuel in their reserves. First, they said the reserves themselves had a problem. They had issues. I don't know whether leakages or whatever, but we didn't have anything. So for a problem that is simply recurring, for a problem that we are facing for the third or whatever time, we are not caught off guard. We are not caught by surprise. You would imagine that we are more prepared than we were last time.
Right.
Now, this recent one, or the current one that we are talking about, the reasons that are being given are, one, the checks at the border, the way bridges, that there are delays there. Second, the COVID tests that have been a requirement, both on the side of Kenya and on our side at both Malaba and Busia borders. My question here, or issue is, all the explanations that they give are things that can be projected by a government that is serious on planning. You can know that when I come up with this intervention, or when I do this, this is likely to happen. That when we subject all these truck drivers to tests at the border, this is likely to happen. You can project the fuel supplies that are going to be there, or if there is even going to be a crisis. But when the public is crying and you're also crying as if you're caught by surprise, then we wonder whether you're really in charge. And if you're in charge, the question is whether you understand what you're doing. The trucks that they have been talking about, I remember last time the Prime Minister telling us that, at the border now, the trucks on the side of Kenya, it's over 75 kilometers. 75 kilometers of trucks lining up. All these did not build up in just one day. They must have been observing 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, it's accumulating. But can you say that a serious government would not be able to project that if this continues, we are going to have a crisis in our landlocked country where we don't have any other alternative source? So to come up with all these threats that they are putting on fuel distributors, on private, those who are in the business of fuel, I don't think those threats are really meaningful. This was really avertible. It's a problem that shouldn't have happened in the first place. It's not one that is caused by changes in the fuel markets worldwide, globally. It's not caused by changes in currency, that maybe the dollar, the comparison of the shilling to the dollar has changed, and that's why prices are shooting that high.
Yeah,
it's a problem caused by sheer incompetence and negligence on their duties. The president said when he had just appointed the current cabinet that he has brought in fishermen and fisherwomen, and I think they are being true to the word. They are literally acting like that, being so basic, so raw in things where you would expect at least some average kind of understanding of how things should run and how to project. So that's generally my appreciation of what is happening. It's a crisis that should have been averted in the first place.
I want to go back to the issue that you just introduced, the issue of fuel reserves. I think on one of the talk shows, Namboze intimated that when this government came in, when they used the fuel in the reserves, I think when they used the fuel in the reserves, they just took it and they just didn't think about refilling those reserves. And you wonder, how does a country function when you know that, first of all, you're a landlocked country, you do not produce oils or fuel, and then you do not take the responsibility to refill the only reserves, oil reserves that you have in the country. How does a government that has been in power for 35 years act like this, especially when we are talking about a recurring issue? Dr. Stella, yes. And also,
so what about a fuel card? How do they function? They live very separate lives from everyday Ugandans who rely on petrol and diesel and paraffin to survive. They have fuel cards, fueled by taxpayers' monies. They have those guzzlers, which are given to them at 200 million shillings. I'm not talking about parliament and maybe cabinet. Each of them has a 200 million shilling fuel guzzler. They have cards. They go and pack their cars with their big, huge CC tanks, and they get refueled. The reality of Ugandans who rely on the fuel that comes in from the border and goes to pump stations and we buy by the liter with our hard-earned cash is not their reality. And so a lot of the issues that arise from the fuel crisis, a lot of the issues that arise because we are landlocked, these guys are not landlocked. They live wherever they want.
Right.
Mutebile died in Aga Khan Hospital. He didn't die in Mulago. He can fly out anytime. Okay. Their babies are born in Germany and Sweden and Europe. They eat toasted bread from Canada, and they drink spice water from Israel, and etc. etc. They don't live our realities. They don't need an economy that works. We're a landlocked country, a government that has been managing or mismanaging, managing resources for 35 years in a landlocked country, knows that the public who rely on public services would have to rely on a reserve. But I think for me that at the core of the question of the fuel crisis is this apartheid or separation between Ugandans of means, those related to the Ugandans with power to abuse and steal from the public purse, a very small group, and then the rest of us, whether you're middle class or lower class or classless. I think that the gap is widening much more. And I think the question for me is, I think Jimmy talked about, he asked, do they understand, do those in leadership understand the problem? Now, in addition to the rationale and understanding and analyzing, what the problem is and coming up with solutions, I think I want to add a layer of care. Do they care? Okay, there is understanding and refusing to care because we are subhuman in their eyes. We are not human enough, so they don't care enough about our plight. Right? I think for me, the fuel crisis is very much related to an ugly, monstrous creation, the road toll system.
Right.
That takes people to Entebbe. They can afford to pay the toll prices. and they don't, they are exonerated from them, right? Someone says the fuel prices went as far as 8,000 shillings per liter, right? Imagine ambulance services, imagine a mother going to give birth, imagine teachers going to teach, imagine all the imaginations that rely on fuel, right? I think that this separation between those of us without the power in Uganda and those with power is a real separation. If we don't do anything about it, there'll be more and more crises. I think that leadership that cares about the public good, public services, wealthy people don't rely on public services to survive, right? It's mainly the poor and the disenfranchised who rely on a government that works. I want to talk about taxes in this regard because in addition to everything else is a high tax regime, especially on fuel. I was listening, I'm not sure to who, I was listening to Dr. Chiza Besigye. He had a program yesterday where he was asked about owning a Total station in Zambia. And he said that the taxes on a liter of petrol are up to 2,000. And he was referring to when a liter was 4,000 and almost half the price, the pump price of oil, right, went to tax. So a government that overtaxes fuel or petrol, the oil crisis is clearly a government that does not care for its people. Because even when the taxes are taken, they don't cater for us, they cater for them and theirs. And so I think for me that this schism talks about, it amplifies the issue of mismanagement, misgovernance, bad leadership, failure, crisis. I watched the video of the truck drivers playing football. Their trucks are packed, 70 kilometers of packed trucks. And bikusobera embeera ekusobera n'ogamba ababbulo ani alina akapiira tugira tusamba not because like the paralysis extends everywhere, right? I don't think the solution is going to come from a good revised economic or fiscal policy. The solution to this crisis is going to come from Museveni going and his system. As long as Museveni is still in the leadership of Uganda, we're going to have more and more crises. They can't. Abavubi tebasobola kumanaging bintu bya Uganda. Museveni n'abavubi bagende batuviire. I think for me, like all the crises I think about, I wonder, would the technocrats and the experts who've gone to colleges and universities and have degrees and lots of experience, would our knowledge make a change to Uganda? As long as the managers and the decision makers and the policy makers and the program designers are under the captivity of Yoweri Museveni and his dictatorship, we are joking. And so I think for me to deal with the crisis, we have to first deal with our political questions as a country, get rid of Museveni, change the regime, and then we can settle all these crises because they're all interrelated. And whether it's fuel, which is economic, or it affects households, how mothers cooking, okay? Of course, then we go and cut up trees and use firewood, and then there's an environmental crisis. All these crises are interlinked, but I think for me, ekyennyanja kiduda first from the Chitwe. Ngege yaduda. Museveni agende bijja kutereera.
Right. Well, when it seems we are delving back into the political question now. But before we go into the political question, because now what I want to question is whether we are ready to take to change government, because many people are questioning what the opposition is doing. What is the plan for the opposition? Does the opposition have a plan to get rid of Mr. Museveni? But you talked about the highway, Entebbe Express Highway, and the toll fees that they charge. For every person who goes, you have to pay 5,000. And I guess every time you go, you have to pay the same amount of money. So when you're going, you pay 5,000. When you're coming back, you pay 5,000. And then when you come back, you pay 5,000. And then when you're leaving, you still pay 5,000. So most of the tolls I've seen, at least here in in Canada or the US, is they charge you when you're leaving. For example, if you're going to the airport, certain airports in certain states or certain provinces here, they only charge you once when you're going. So when you're going, you get a receipt to indicate that you have passed. Therefore, when you're coming back, you have to pay a toll. In Uganda's case, you pay when you're leaving and also when you're coming back. And I'm just trying to understand why that, if true, why it is structured in that manner, and why MPs haven't spoken about it, and how it would affect someone in such a crisis, a fuel crisis, because now it ties into the crisis. I saw some of the traffic, I think on Wednesday or Thursday, where the entire express highway, which is supposed to be a solution to traffic, was packed with cars. How do we resolve that? Mr. Kajoba, your thoughts on that? I don't know if you saw that clip.
I think there are quite so many questions within that one question, within the question that you've asked. But again, with the risk of re-echoing what has already been said, it is a question of priorities in our country. It is a question of priorities and what is important. I think we have a challenge where our leaders act like mercenaries. You know, the thing I know, I have ever worked as something you would call a mercenary. Not in the sense of the movies, but when I had when I was studying my MA in Montreal, we have rules that govern. So sometimes in the summer, when you were not at school, you had a provision to go and make some money to punctuate, on your other sources. Right. So there are things that are called agencies. They are called employment agencies.
Right.
The thing about employment agencies, I remember when I contacted one, they called me for something called an interview. And I arrived. I came dressed smartly. I was fairly new to the country. So I came with my understanding of Ugandan standards when they invite you for an interview. I came rather very smart. I had a jacket on. I had, my hair was neater than it is today. My beard was well trimmed. I came ready for an interview. When I reached there, they
and
gave
by
me
jacket, you mean sports jacket, not this winter jacket.
No. I mean a dress jacket, a coat. A coat, like it was summer, so I didn't need a winter jacket. I came with a coat, what we call a coat,
dress jacket.
Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
I arrived expecting. I even I went through Google questions to expect on an interview in Canada because I was fairly new to the country. When I reached there, they gave me a form to fill out things about me, make some of these declarations, one of which I talked about here, visible minority, that shocked the life out of me. For the first time I learned I was a visible minority. I didn't even know what that meant until that point. After that, they simply asked me the following. Can you do A? I said yes. Can you do B? I said yes. Can you do C? I said yes. Asked me, how many hours are you available? I told them the hours. Which days are you available to work? I told them the days I was available to work. Then they asked me, how much money are you willing to work for? I said, I can't work below this amount. They said, okay, thank you for coming in. I'll send you an email when something comes up. That evening, they sent me an email with a job to begin the following day. And in this place where I worked, the organization didn't even pay me. I wasn't their worker at all, basically. I was a worker for this, what you would call my handlers. So I handled everything from that. If I fell sick, I wasn't paid. If I didn't show up to work, I wasn't paid. They didn't call me to ask me, why didn't you show up? Apart from my handlers. So I was a mercenary. And the one thing I loved about this mercenary work and why it is what we opt for at the time is you could leave at leisure. You didn't need to give notice. You came and left at leisure. If after 1 week you decided you could even leave midway shift and you say, you know what, I don't want to do this. So I think our leaders function like mercenaries, because the thing I learned from working as a mercenary for some time is that ultimately all mercenaries only care about their survival. Everything else do not matter. When it comes down at the end of the day, the most important thing, actually the only thing that matters is their survival. So in as far as whatever they are doing that benefits you, the third party, ensures their own survival and their interests, then they will keep doing that. Only in as far as it fits into their own survival. I think that is how our people are functioning, because like my colleagues have just said, the problems we're having in Uganda are not really new. They are not fresh. We have had them all this time. So the fact that even when they happen in Uganda, they know who is about to riot before they riot. They know who is about to conduct a demonstration. They know who is going to conduct it tomorrow. They have a big network geared towards identifying who is threatening their hold on power. So that for me tells me that they do have the capacity, if they choose to anticipate some of the challenges that face the population. But in reality, they are divorced from that reality, like my colleagues have just said. I once had a conversation with someone whose name I won't mention. I worked on a project one time in Uganda prior to when I left the country, where it was a system strengthening project. So we used to move to different parts of the country, conducting certain trainings for health workers and district health management teams. And so I got a chance to visit health facilities almost in most of the districts in the country. And what I saw was very disturbing. I think last year or so, a few years ago, I was having a conversation with someone. We went to school together, but now is what they say is in the thing. We were having a conversation about the state of our nation and services. And I happened to talk about the health crisis. And I said, do you know that for many people in this country, a mother will have their child sick, but the reality of accessing medical, I think it was during the lockdown when they said you have to go to the RDC before you can even take a person to the hospital. I think you remember that drama happened around that time. I said, this is unreasonable. Because for some people, the distance, first of all, between their houses to the RDC, and from the RDC to go home and pick your patient to the hospital, sometimes the reaction time is the difference between the survival or death of the patient. And I said, in some of our countries, some of the districts, health facilities, on top of being in terrible conditions and not having, the necessary supplies that they need to function, are almost hard to reach. When I was working on that project, we had a car, but we struggled to reach some health facilities in the country. And this person, I said, I was trying to complain to this person that the health condition, the health sector is a mess. We do not have functional hospitals. And this guy told me that, oh, come on, David, do not be unrealistic. I said, what do you mean? He said, we have hospitals in Uganda. We have the Nakaseros. We have the case clinics. We have the Kampala hospitals. And then he mentioned a few, fancy, if you like, hospitals in Kampala. But then I asked him a question, but how many people can afford those hospitals? The answer astounded me. He told me Oh, come on, David. Are you trying to tell me you cannot afford to take a patient to Nakasero? I was dumbfounded.
Right.
And my argument was, it's not about me.
Mm-hmm.
How many people have the privilege that I have today? And a few years ago, I was one of those people.
Right.
Now I can afford to send my mother to Nakasero. But how many people can? That is, you're talking about things that benefit almost 1% of the population,
Right.
or probably 2% of the population. At most, if I'm very generous, 10% of the population.
Yeah.
And so the priorities of our people, they're very divorced from what is actually happening. And so when they're setting up these toll charges, which toll things, I cannot speculate, but it is debatable whether they will be paying them, themselves. I don't know if now I am not against a toll system. There is value to it, especially because it is a luxury, because there's an alternative. So in that regard, I understand why, they could levy a toll fee and everything. But if the systems were streamlined and these revenues are put to good use, then we wouldn't be having these conversations. But we do have a leadership class, a political class, that is somehow divorced from the reality. Even those who, the other day, I saw the Prime Minister commenting about the issue of it has been making it has been going viral on social media when she said she was trying to say something, then she laughed and fell back in her chair. Is it something of the sort? And then at some point she came out and said, boycott those those centers that are hiking prices, so so when you look at the responses, a few months ago, we had I think it was the first lady of the country wondering why parents do not give their kids packed lunch. Yeah? Was it packed lunch to go with to school? You see, you realize that these people, their priorities are somewhere else, and they do not have an appreciation of the reality of the common Ugandan. And so I am not very optimistic about anything really, because Uganda is not the only landlocked country. And I've been checking the fuel prices in Rwanda, which is also a landlocked country like Uganda. And as of I think the 20th of June, it was at about 4,000 Ugandan shillings, with all the challenges happening. So if another landlocked country is at that rate, and for us we're at 8,000, I think it tells you that the problem is not about landlockedness or not producing fuel, because there are not so many countries on the African continent that produce fuel, but the reality is not the same. So it's a question of priorities for me. And what I can say is that the priorities of our leaders are somewhere else. It is not about service delivery. It is somewhere else that I think many people would probably speculate that it is indeed about holding on to power rather than not using the power to serve the people.
Dr. Spire, as we wrap up on that issue, I think I want to hear your thoughts about that before we delve into the issue of land. Pregnant learners and whether they should go back to school or if they should stay at home until further notice. And also, if the government actually planned well, was the return to school well planned? And I think Dr. Steyer will speak to that as we delve into that question of education and specifically the issue of pregnant learners and young mothers, teenage mothers. I know that there has been a lot of incest during this lockdown 88 weeks is a lot. 88 weeks is about 616 days of schools not functioning, and I'm including weekends, of course, because we do have boarding schools who operate during weekends. But Mr. Spire, your thoughts on that as we wrap it up, that issue?
Yeah, first, yes, sorry about my dark image earlier. We were in a blackout. It's unfair that I'm the only one on this side of underdevelopment. I can see everyone there swinging in comfort and resources. Yeah, so we've been in a blackout here. It's just yeah, but about that issue of the road tolls, I don't have good information about it. I've not used the road ever since they started that charging that, so I'm not quite sure what's on the ground, and I wouldn't want to comment without information. But you had also asked, as part of that, what is opposition doing? Is it speaking out to this? I would look at that at two levels. One, what is opposition? And this question is often asked by many people, what's opposition doing? But who is opposition? Who is it that we expect to speak out on such things, and it's their duty to speak out and not ours or anyone else? I often have a problem with that. Just like there's so many people that send me messages, inbox, asking me to draw cartoons about certain things or to comment about them on Facebook or Twitter, and ask them, but you also have a Twitter handle, you have you on Facebook, why don't you write about it? Yes, we could be having different levels of following, or maybe you could think that my audience is bigger than yours, but with your small audience, at least try to do something. But this kind of feeling that there is someone whose responsibility it is to speak for others, I think it's really inappropriate. So even in asking here, what's opposition doing? I know so many people, those who are within the parties, if that's what we are asking, party structures, they are speaking out. I've seen FDC statements. NUP, their leaders have been speaking. I've seen Norbert Mao sometimes speaking. But we know that in the context in which we are operating, speech is not enough. The other alternatives we would have been having is to protest about such things. Quite often I've seen Stella calling out to people to protest, and the response, including from me, myself, it's, yeah, sometimes you really feel ashamed that there are only 2-3 people who are ready to respond. Why? It's because of what the environment has become, why even Dr. Stella herself is not here, why she has had first to run to Kenya, and now she has to go to Germany, even if it's for the scholarship, but it's partly for her safety. That the environment has been made very unsafe for whoever wants to try to challenge the state, not even really challenging, to question it, to try to bring out alternative voices or to try to express opinions of dissent. We know what happens ever since, I wouldn't really say it's just with November 2020, although that I think has been one of the worst. But even before that, people have been watching how Dr. Besigye was treated, how Kyagulanyi and Paul were treated during the previous elections. And I think other people who have tried to challenge the state. So increasingly, you see the numbers diminishing of people who are ready to stand up to the state, because yes, they also want to preserve their lives. And some people speak as though their lives are to be protected, and others are out to be on the streets there to risk their lives. I'm not saying that those who are ready to go to the streets should not go, but that no one should think or present it as though it's a responsibility of some to speak and others to wait to be spoken for, yet they have a fora to use. These days, you cannot claim that you don't have space. At least in the past, you would say if you are not able to reach radio, the newspapers, or wherever else, you had no audience. But you can just create a Facebook page, a Twitter handle. I see some people continuously posting bags, posting pictures at places hanging out. If you choose to use your freedom simply to talk about your hanging out and whatever, then why should you cry foul that others are not speaking for you? So I don't think it's unfair to keep calling on the opposition. Yes, they have accountability to us, but it's not entirely their duty. Second, we know that in a patrimonial society state like ours, the state tries to structure itself in such a way that it provides some small islands of comfort to some people, such that they speak, but they feel they somehow need the state. We even see it in opposition. I don't want to begrudge people for being comfortable, but sometimes you really feel that some people are too comfortable to say certain things. Some of the MPs, for example, in opposition, who used to say certain things initially, today they speak in tongues. So when the state operates like that, by finding ways of compromising some people, even in subtle ways, then you have to find alternative means. But what alternative means do we have? I think that should be partly the question. When people are running away from Uganda, when everyone feels threatened, what are the alternatives? If you're talking about policy alternatives, let's say on this road toll, those alternatives are being given. Has government taken up any, apart from some that are taken without credit? Sometimes in the past, you can mention things like removing graduated tax, which was an idea of Tavesije, I think even UPE. But apart from that, many of the ideas that are coming from opposition are simply trashed. So it's not that opposition is not really contributing. If you're talking about opposition in that problematic sense,
you have painted a picture where space for freedom of thought, and we shall discuss freedom of thought later on before we close, is diminishing. I'm going to ask a rhetorical question. You could answer if you want. But does any one of you think that we are in Thomas Hobbes' state of nature right now? And I know you're all scholars and you understand Thomas Hobbes and what how he described the state of nature. Is Uganda in a state of nature right now?
Yeah, if by state of nature you mean that of Thomas Hobbes, of everyone against all, that it's a state where you don't have any government. It's a state where, like the state of creation in the original nature before there came in any institutions. We are not exactly in a state of nature. We are in a state of what Thomas Hobbes suggested, having a Leviathan as a strong person would somehow manage to control some of the interests of individuals that would be antithetical to the interests of others. But the danger, as Thomas has been critiqued, the danger in creating a Leviathan as a solution to some of the individual preferences that are antithetical to those of others is that the Leviathan itself, if not controlled, it eventually becomes a problem to individuals. So in Uganda, what we have is that Leviathan, a state that has too much power that it forgets that the duty for its creation is to serve the people under it. In fact, there is no reason for government beyond that. There is no reason as to why I should willingly forfeit my freedoms with which I'm created. The freedom not to pay taxes, the freedom not to be controlled by anyone. I think that is the natural liberty with which we are created, which Rousseau talks about. We are born free, but everywhere in chains. No one would have wanted to surrender those liberties, except if it were in exchange for something that they did not have in that state of nature. And that's where the problem is. We surrendered our liberties, we gave up ourselves to the state But what is the state doing in return?
This is the state of the nation. Rifa Mwanga. We are deliberate, we are reasonable, we are uncensored. The state of the nation with Henry Salu.
Dr. Stella Nyanzi, your thoughts, your response to Dr. Spire, and your thoughts.
Right, so I'm not a heavy theorist, and I didn't know this state of nature theory, but I understand Leviathan because I went to church when I was a child. I think for me, the analogy of the Leviathan, a greedy, overly obese creature who's feeding with so much greed and avarice. In relation to Uganda, one of the things I'm thinking about is, at what point does one say, I'm tired of having power? At what point does at what point will the military junta of Museveni say we've had enough power? And I think for me that Leviathan in that case, figuratively now as a poetess, as a person who works with language, is an image that represents this gluttony around power, overwhelming gluttony that I don't understand. But I'm responding to Jimmy's take on your Hobbesian question about state of nature or whatever. I just wanted to quickly tag a little bit about the question of who the opposition is and who must speak against, or who must counter, whose voice must counter the voice of the state, whose voice must criticize and critique. And I think the point has to be made again and again and again that opposition is not only the political parties that identify as opposition, but opposition today in Uganda is all of us who are disenfranchised, who are oppressed, who are marginalized, and one doesn't have to be a member of a political party to be affected by the wanton abuse of power and the violations that are going on in the name of the Musevenis, which brings me to the question you wanted to ask me as you prepared. You gave me a bit of preparation and you asked about the children, the girls, the learners who conceived during the COVID lockdown and are either pregnant or young mothers with babies and school reopened. I want to go there. I'm dying to go there as the token woman on the group, if not for anything else, because I think that the Leviathan doesn't care about women. We live in a misogynistic...
Just to make things clear and to set the record straight, you are not here as a token. You are here because you deserve to be here. You belong here.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Henry. And I insist on... When Jimmy was starting, he said, he may not be the best person to speak about topics because yada, yada, yada. I think for me, I always insist on speaking because I have an opinion based on experience on anything Uganda, and I refuse to shut up. But on the issue of pregnant young girls, I think among us, I'm the only womb carrier, right? I'm the only mother, although we may have parents with us. And so questions around the stigma that comes to a young, particularly below 18, so below the age of consent, child in Uganda conceiving. We live in a very conservative society where religion and culture and moralism, all sorts of moralism around girls' virginity and girls' purity make it very difficult to be a young girl in school that's pregnant or breastfeeding. And I want, first of all, even before we address the education system, that we must look inward at ourselves as parents, as citizens, as neighbors, as teachers, as, you know, community people, that there is a very high stigma attached to young girl getting pregnant. But we don't get pregnant on our own. There's always a male, there's always a father, there's always a sperm donor, whether it be incestuous or out of consent or rape or defilement, there's always a male other who donated sperm. And I think that after making the point around the high levels of stigma around teenage pregnancy, right, arising from very conservative communities in Uganda, even when people are elite and middle class and educated, because of religion and because of culture, there's a high level of stigma and ostracization attached to young girls getting pregnant in school. Now, there was no in school for the last 2 years, and we blame that squarely on the dictatorship of Museveni, the mismanagement of the lives of young people, young girls of menstruating age were running around. Many of them come from backgrounds of poverty and lack. And I had a number of girls who were having sex in exchange for food, sex in exchange for basic requirements such as sanitary pads. And these stories were told throughout the lockdown. Nobody did anything around contraception, access to family planning, access to contraceptive pills, access to education, even about contraception. I know that the Minister of Education, Mama Janet Mucharawa Museveni, has had a whole battle against those of us who support the introduction of contraception in schools, even before COVID-19. And so a lot of young people approach the topic of contraception with a lot of shame. Okay, I think that religion and culture have been abused to abuse women's knowledge levels. And so young women who already are menstruating cannot prevent pregnancy, whether in school or out of school. So the question of returning to school pregnant or breastfeeding presupposes that school is a safe place. The communities these kids are in are not safe. Parents are forcing children to have abortions. There's a girl who came to my home maybe 3 weeks before school started, and her parents put a condition on her that they would not return her to school if she did not accept to have an abortion. Right? And so our country, again, because of conservative norms, has still got an illegal abortion services, right, are still illegal in the country. One of the solutions right now, and I'm speaking as a feminist, but also as a sexual and reproductive health scholar, one of the solutions that could have been offered, particularly in cases of forced sex where girls conceived out of rape or incest or gender-based violence, where girls also did not plan to have the pregnancy, whether it was within love relationships and consensual sex, but the pregnancy is no longer wanted, self-termination would have been a service if the country cared for the women and their bodies in our country. But the legal regime around abortion in Uganda still maintains that it is criminal for a mother to have an abortion, and it's criminal also for the doctor and medical facilities who give those abortion services, simply unless the fetus is at risk or the mother is at risk. So abortion is a no-go. Contraception knowledge is not given. Access to contraception pills or even condoms for girls is not provided. And then we wonder why, with all that ignorance and lack of knowledge and misinformation and misconceptions, young girls are getting pregnant in an environment of poverty, where we have sugar daddies and transactional sex and love, I forgot what it's called, love with benefits.
Right.
So going to school, again, it's just a symptom of the failure to manage the wombs of young women with information that's relevant. The whole management of humans, young women, who don't have consenting power in Uganda, because age of consent is at 18, has been mismanaged. So how do we manage them at school when we have failed to manage them in the communities? How do we manage them post-COVID lockdown and the schools are open when we failed to manage them in the lockdown system, in the lockdown period? Many of these young girls are showing up pregnant, and I have seen cartoons by Spire of pregnant young people. And I think for me, if the representation is to raise questions, that's important. If the representation is to further stigmatize an already stigmatized category, I find it quite problematic. I want to say that teachers have not been prepared to receive these children. Pupils have not been prepared not to point fingers and whisper at these young girls. And so already having lost 2 years, some young girls are being forced either by family or by the stigma at school to still stay away, maybe for 9 months, maybe for 6 months. I want to talk a bit about the revised, there's a revised policy, I'll look for, it's called the Revised Guidelines of Prevention and Management of Teenage Pregnancies in School Settings in Uganda, dated 2020. Okay, so these guidelines are less than 2 years old. They are in place, and they still have a provision of mandatory maternity leave from 3 months of pregnancy until 6 months after birth for girls. That is the fucked up country we belong to. That even after keeping our girls away from school and not giving them information about contraception, not providing contraception, and exposing them to a lot of poverty that induced many, coerced many to have transactional sex they conceived, we still want to keep them away for school for 9 take away 6, 9 take away 3, 6 months plus 12, a whole year away from school as calculating. So 3 months, you can go to school as long as you're not 3 months pregnant. After 3 months pregnancy, there's mandatory maternity. And this is a requirement of the revised guidelines. Hallelujah. The revised guidelines require young girls who are pregnant to take a whole year out of school, having missed 2 years. One of the small benefits in the guidelines is a provision that says that these children should be allowed to sit for their terminal exams, their end of year exams, right? But apart from that, I haven't seen any safeguards, right? What happens to the child who has a child that's breastfeeding that goes to class on her back and begins crying in the middle of chemistry paper 2? What happens when the baby poo-poos in its nappies? I don't know if they have nappies or pampers or what, and the child needs to be changed. What happens to other students as well? What are teachers doing? And so I think that the question has not been well thought out. I know that there are religious leaders who have made statements and said that for their religious-based schools, these children are not welcome. They are outcasts who should stay with their sinful evidence of sin and fornication, and they should not be entertained in their schools. I think that the policy in Uganda is not clear. There was talk about rhetoric, actually, about we shall open up and embrace these children. I don't think enough preparation has been made. I think that in terms of preparation, we have to first decolonize our whole minds, right? First, that the parents will allow their children to go to school, because it starts right from home, where a father tells her child, I will not pay your fees if you don't have an abortion, okay? Because parents have to pay school fees. And so we need to work with the minds of the community, not just say schools open up. We have to work with the minds of the school owners, if it's religious or cultural or secular, whatever it is. And then we have to work with the school environment, because I think many school owners and headmasters and teachers are weary about having pregnant children because of untested hypotheses around their inability to concentrate in class when they're pregnant or when they have babies. And I think these hypotheses have not really been tested in the context of Uganda. Maybe a child gets more serious when they're pregnant and they realize they are at risk of losing out on this opportunity for education. So what I'm saying is there's been a lot of mismanagement, and I don't see any efforts made at a serious addressing of the issue. If you ask me what I would do if my daughter conceived and had to go back to school, I'm of the opinion I would facilitate my child with education. First of all, say to her, I would, if she was in Uganda today and abortion services are not accessible, I would encourage her to go to a school where she will be welcomed. I would, as a parent, speak with the teachers and to ask for an opportunity to have a school health education, sex education, a session where we talk with all the girls and the boys about having pregnant and breastfeeding children. I would have preparatory sessions with the children, and then we would need to normalize having pregnant children in school. There are questions around how the practicalities would be arranged, but those are conversations that must be entered into by the Ministry of Education, especially if they are claiming to welcome our children back. But I think having missed 2 years, one cannot, must not, should not, will not, must resist the idea of spending another whole year, as is in the guidelines that are governing the retention, the continuation, and the re-entry of pregnant children in school. I've spoken a lot. I've made some points. I hope that they are clear, because I'm just thinking through what it means to have pregnant minors needing to return to school.
Thank you so much for that submission. I think you make a very good, in my opinion, at least. I think you make a very good presentation, and I think you represent some of the ideas that I have personally, because I think it's very important for us to let these young minors, pretty much. They're not. Some of them are barely teenagers who are either mothers or pregnant. I know it's complicated because so many people have been messaging me and asking me about this question. What do you actually think? The now generation. I'm part of the now generation, and this is a virtual group that has a lot of young intellectuals from different universities, mostly from Makerere University, but also from Chambo, Gombarara, and other institutions of higher learning in Uganda. I think we have had a conversation regarding what we need to do with pregnant teenagers or young mothers. Should we be letting them be in school spaces? And as you said, coming from a very conservative community, I think the vast majority of them are saying that these teenagers should be sent back home, be taken care of by their parents and communities, and then come back later. Be counseled to come back later. And some of us have been arguing that this is, first of all, encouraging dropout for young girls, but also it is a creation of a generation of illiterate single mothers, because for some of them they may have gotten these pregnancies through rape or defilement. So if you send them away from school spaces for another year and expect them to come back in these spaces to study with people who are not their peers, who are not going to, I know there's going to be some cases of bullying, but your peers do not bully you at the same rate as younger peers. If you come back as a mother, you're coming back in a space where you're going to be studying with people who are not really your peers. They are younger than you. They are not mothers to some extent. But I guess my question is now, as I go to the gentleman in the house, and I know this is very complicated. How do we normalize having either pregnant teenagers in classes or teenage moms in classes? And I know many people have been questioning the idea of normalizing this phenomenon and arguing that if we do normalize it, it's going to become the culture of the country. We won't be able to stop other kids or other teenagers from becoming pregnant. After all, we would have already encouraged it. I don't know what other men in the house think, but I think I'm gonna give Dr. Spire an opportunity to start, and then Mr. Kajoba will come in next.
Yeah, first of all, Henry, if the question is about normalizing, if these girls are allowed back in school, the pregnant ones or those who have babies, is that normalizing pregnancy in schools? Is that normalizing giving birth while in school? I don't really think so. It might be looked at as normalizing if you said that, yes, they can go back and it's okay for anyone to become pregnant, whether you're in primary or whatever level. And I don't think that's what everyone is saying. At least maybe there are some who are saying that. The question is, if it happens, as we have seen, it has happened, what should we do? I think whoever is saying that this is to normalize is simply trying to, in logic, we call that a red herring. You introduce something else into an argument in order to draw away attention of those who are in the argument to something else, which is not really part and parcel of the argument at hand. So I think normalizing is out of the question. Just like those who have turned this into a judgment, I heard the bishop of which place, I think Stella has also mentioned some religious leaders, the one who say they shouldn't go back because they would be sending a bad message to other girls. Is to allow these girls back about sending a message to other girls? Is it also about their rights, the rights of these girls? Is it also about the well-being of these girls? Should we say that they should stay home just because we don't want others to get a certain kind of message? If you say that that's what we should do, you're passing a judgment on girls in their entirety without even knowing what caused whatever they are facing in the first place. And I think both ethically and even religiously, if I'm at least to consider Christian religious considerations, it wouldn't be fair to judge someone without knowing their circumstances, the reasons as to why they are in the state in which they are. So I wouldn't really go with the message of that bishop. But before we go into discussions of whether these girls should go back to school or not, I think that question is oversimplified. It's not just about whether they should go back to school or not. That framing symbolizes the fire brigade approach of this government in general, even with regard to other things we have been discussing, fuel, road tolls and all that. We have had the issue of girls getting pregnant while at school for, I think, as far back as we can recall in our education system. It's not really a new problem. I don't recall exactly who, they said that for most of the societies, what the COVID-19 pandemic has done is to expose their weaknesses, to expose places where they had gaps which they had either taken for granted or neglected. What we are faced with the challenge of girls is just a matter of magnitude, but it's not about the question itself. If we had taken it seriously, we would be having quick answers to it even before it came at this magnitude. the patriarchal system that is part of the problem and all the issues, the implications around it, it has been with us for so long. We have been discussing it. We have been discussing how to make the education system favorable for the girl child and remove all these impediments along the way. And this is one of the impediments. But now for us to act as if it's entirely a new thing, and the question is whether they should go back to school or not, I think that's not where we should be. And it's not going to get us answers, because even if we said, as I would say personally, that they should go back, as Dr. Stelany has asked, are the schools really prepared? Are the teachers prepared? Are fellow pupils prepared to study with such girls? What scenario is going to be there when one girl is seated right next to another who is breastfeeding or with a baby crying? Not that that should not happen, but now that it's happening all of a sudden, spontaneously, without enough preparation, how is it going to be like? So even when the vice president comes out, as she has, to state it unequivocally that girls have to go back to school, pregnant girls, we should also be hearing, what preparations have you made all along the way, not just now, for it to be possible for a pregnant girl who might even not be responsible for their situation to be able to continue with their education? Are we really prepared? If we are talking about an education system or a state of education where it's even very difficult for a girl child who is not pregnant or not carrying a baby to study, how about one who is carrying a baby? If we were still discussing the issue of pads, the one that Dr. Stella was at the other time, and the First Lady did not want to be reminded that she had promised pads. If that is still an issue, which I think affects a wide section of girls, how about this? I think those are the questions we should be grappling with, but not just for the now, but in terms of the wider policy policy implications, the things that we should do, not just respond to the sparks that we see every other time. Ultimately, all this will take us back to the issue of governance and how the entire system is structured. We shall discuss every aspect. We shall go to health, we shall go to education, we'll come to fuel, and then we go to something else. But all of this is going to lead us to one point. If we do not have our governance sorted, if we still have people whom we know for sure, or at least we have suspicions that we can defend to a certain extent, that they should not be in such positions, thinking for the country, in the education ministry, in the different ministries, or even where we have, they do not have the powers to exercise or to put to practice. What do you expect when all this ultimately is about whether the president should stay in power or not? Because that's the most important thing in this country. The rest, you can just fix patches here and there, as long as the train can keep moving. Thank you.
Mr. Kajova, your response to all the issues that have been mentioned both by Dr. Stella and Dr. Spire.
I don't know if I'm going to respond to their issues per se, but maybe I will as I raise mine. I am very disturbed that we are having a conversation of whether or not girls should return to school because they're pregnant. I am particularly disturbed to have that as a national conversation because it does make the assumption that education is some sort of privilege that can be withdrawn as punishment for certain misdeeds. I don't know whether we are still subscribing to the idea that a girl child belongs to the kitchen, and therefore allowing them to school is somehow a token for good behavior, amongst other things, including not getting pregnant. And so if they take a wrong turn in regard to that stipulation, then we pull away our wonderful gift that we have awarded to them for good behavior in punishment, such that they don't do this, the wrong way. Because I think Ugandans, we are very forgetful people, and we are not very good students of history. If I may get a little attitude to generalize, I think the biggest percentage of some of our policymakers in the country, even these religious leaders who are uttering these rather disturbing statements, the vast majority of them, their mothers had them as teenagers. We are behaving like the concept of teenagers becoming mothers is a new phenomenon in Uganda. We know for a fact that not so many years ago, as soon as a girl showed signs of breasts, they were married off. Now, I'm not saying this to say that it is a good practice and therefore we should encourage it. What I'm saying this to, I think, invite us to realize that teenagers have sex, or at least their organs are developed enough at that point to want to have it. And so, whereas it isn't something to be celebrated, we shouldn't act very surprised that a teenager engaged in sexual intercourse and she ended up pregnant. For me, that's where I want to start. It shouldn't surprise us as a people that it has happened. That is where I want to start. Now that it is happening, and we know it does happen, and we also know, if you have been to school, I remember when I went to school, perhaps some of you went to schools where people were very righteous, for lack of a better word. When I was going to school in secondary school, we knew a few people who were, getting involved in these sexual relations, and we knew them. Now, many of them didn't get pregnant. But it is probably, and some of them are not even mothers yet. Yet they began as early as we were in primary, others began when we were in lower secondary, in O level, but somehow they are not yet mothers. So this notion of interpreting a girl getting pregnant as a sign of, I don't know, immorality or amorality is rather shallow in my view. So is the challenge of teenage pregnancy a real challenge? Of course it is a challenge, but we need to approach it with if I might go as far as to use this terminology, we need to approach it with sober minds as we hold this conversation, instead of the problem of looking to religious leaders to help us with such national, if you like, challenges is that religious leaders, many of them are human beings first, because there seems to be a view that when someone wears these religious regalia or priestly regalia or pastoral elements, whatever you want to call it, it somehow divorces them from their humanity and therefore makes whatever they say and suggest something worthy of note. I once was a part of a certain congregation where they were discussing disciplining a young lady who was found to be pregnant in the last few sessions of her marriage counseling. And so this particular religious community decided that they would not wed these people because they had sinned. And so they were discussing issues of disciplining. this person publicly in the church to deter others from trying, from going similar path. And this was a girl who, in my estimation, was at least 28 years old, I beg your pardon. And I remember asking myself a question that if at all these measures that we're using were necessarily going to solve for us the problem that we think is a problem that needs to be solved, and we've been doing this for the longest time, then probably these solutions could have worked. But the reality is the issue of teenage pregnancies is much more complex than sometimes it is simplistically handled. Now, Uganda, like many African countries, in 2013 adopted a continent-wide economic and social development strategy that was basically geared towards building Africa's human capital, which in terms of which was basically explained as their human capital, which they thought was their most precious resource of the continent. And 2 years later, in 2015, we all adopted, Africa and Uganda included, adopted the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, among which was a commitment that no one should be left behind. Which that included access to education and removing all barriers and disparities in terms of the girl child. So, in as far as all these international treaties and the declarations upon which we are signatories and we adopted, it therefore removes any such conversations of whether or not they need to access education. I think whoever espouses such notions should excuse themselves from this conversation. It was to some extent. Now, that being said, I do think that for many people, especially leaders, their decision or their move to try and push this aside, this conversation aside, in terms of saying, well, they should stay home and after they give birth and 6 months, like Stella educated me earlier, according to that policy, the 2020 policy. I think it is one among the many moves that many of our leaders are taking in order to avoid their number one responsibility of providing creative solutions to the national challenges. Because as has been discussed, it is a complex issue, both in terms of the girl itself, the teachers, and the school. I don't want to go back into those details. It is complex. It is hard to know what can be done. How do we send them to school and then make sure they are not bullied? And then the issues of teachers, how do they? We have all these challenges, and they're real challenges and pertinent ones for that matter. So for me, for this first question, should pregnant girls be allowed back in school? I think for me, that is not a question we should ask. Maybe the question that we should be asking is, okay, now that they need to go back to school, how do we go about it? I can't claim to have answers to that question, but I also know, again, going back to like Spire suggested, it is a governance issue. I remember we had a conversation when these lockdowns were, these blanket lockdowns of school closures. I was very, very opposed on social media to this blanket lockdown of schools, kids stay home and all this, because the science suggested, at least the little that I read, I labored, the science suggested that the effect on students, on young people was rather minimal at the time. And indeed, schools continue to function with what you would call with regulations. And I have a friend who has a son here in Canada, and they were going to a boarding school. Even when there was a stay at home, actually for them, what they did is they put their own measure whereby parents were not allowed to access the children at school. And so they kind of built what you would call a camp of sorts. And so they stayed there to ensure that there was a continued access to education. So by the government making these decisions, and many people raised these challenges at the start of the pandemic, that among the challenges is we're going to have so many teenage pregnancies. These issues were raised. And we ignored them. And now that we are faced with these issues, we are actually shocked. I remember the president recently, I think, about a month or so ago, when he was presented with the issue of pregnancy, he said rather recklessly, in my understanding, that, well, is it whether they are pregnant? I think they are alive, something along those lines, that they are not dead. So something. Yeah, but even if they are pregnant, at least they are not dead, they are alive, something along those lines. So for me, the way I interpreted that statement from the Fountain of Honor was that there were creative solutions to when time came for going back to school for these not dead, but now mothers, learners, to go back to school. But again, it comes down to the issue of education and information. Until as a society we stop or we disabuse ourselves from the tendency to demonize conversations around sexuality and human reproduction amongst our little ones, we're going to keep having these problems. Because an educated child is an empowered child. However, because of these things that masquerade as cultural norms or religious norms, I don't even want to put it on culture, because in our cultures, they labor to educate us about this, even in their own ways. That is why in my language, kasolo, chisanyi, vyocha, in their own crude way. In their own crude way, they were laboring to educate. But now that we are calling ourselves a people living in the Enlightenment age, we need to learn something from what our forefathers were trying to do, because we do have better resources. We do have access to things. I once was having a conversation my first degree was in theological studies, and so I also ministered for some time. One time we were having a meeting with the fellow ministers, and this gentleman we were talking about we were going to facilitate a session with young with teens, about relationship. And the tendency all the years I was in this religious tradition, it was, avoidance. Avoid, don't get close to them. When you're talking to a younger man, talk to them in the presence of an elder or a parent, meet somewhere where you can be seen. Do not hold hands. Do not hold hands. It is dangerous. Stand at a few feet. All this, I'm sorry to call it, but nonsense. And so this gentleman was trying to prepare us for the session, and he was speaking in these terms. And I lost it, I remember, because I turned to him and I told him, but I asked him, have you ever wondered why every time you're having these conversations with the teens, they are laughing? He said, well, because teens love talking about these things. I said, no, they're actually mocking you, because they realize how divorced from reality you are. And I looked at this man straight in the eyes and I told him, our daughters are having sex, yours inclusive.
Right.
And I knew this for a fact because I knew she was. So we are having a generation of young people who are so advanced with the technology and everything. They have information that we didn't have at their age. Yet we, who are supposed to guide them, are relegating that duty. Okay, we are running away from this. We are avoiding it. We are avoiding these uncomfortable conversations in the name of preserving. But the information is out there. Things are happening. So I think one of the steps is We need as a society to come to terms with the reality of that the teenage body is an exploring body. It is in the discovery phase, and people in that phase explore things. Amongst other things, is exploring with their reproductive organs, and among the things that can come out of that is pregnancy. So unless we can arrest the challenges at its root and have these conversations and empower our girls and let them know how they can protect themselves, how they can ensure that their safety is taken care of amidst whatever decisions they might make, I think we'll keep going back in circles about this question over and over again. I'm sorry I've taken up a lot of...
Well, thank you for that submission. Many people, though, who have been advocating for these teenage mothers or pregnant teenagers to stay home have been fronting the scientific arguments that teenage mothers or teenage pregnant learners cannot effectively study when they are pregnant, because scientifically, apparently, they are not going to be well prepared for education. Their health is going to be sort of deteriorated. To some extent, some people have labeled them as disabled, and they try to present a scenario where when they go to school, they are just not going to be able themselves to catch up or to be effective in classrooms, and they are going to be bullied. They are going to be teased. They are not going to be welcomed within those communities, even though we do not have statistics or real research regarding how those views, the views of the students, the views of the teachers, the views of those communities, the people within those school communities would behave. It's been almost 2.5 hours having this discussion. Of course, there are so many issues here we can talk about. There are so many crises that are going on. I am going to ask Dr. Stella to wrap up the issue of the land or the pregnant learners or the young moms before we delve into the issue of freedom of thought and specifically our colleague Kakwenza Rukilawasaija. But first, Dr. Stella, your thoughts as we wrap up this issue about pregnant mothers. Of course, we can't have a comprehensive conversation regarding this issue, but your thoughts as you wrap up.
Right. I think that the debate has to happen. I think the debate has to involve difficult language. I have heard of euphemisms such as bisanyi, etc., that all of us must participate. We have seen the religious leaders and, contradicting their very ethos as people of compassion. If men of God are being lacking compassion, then what about those who are godless? Having said that, I think that again, the leadership question arose. It's going to be key. Uganda has no leaders that care for the people of Uganda. Nobody cares enough for the young women. And I think that part of what should happen is the civil society organizations that would have taken up the issue, women's organizations are paralyzed and they really can't do much. The contestation around women's bodies and the ownership of young women's sexual and reproductive rights cannot be undertaken in the current regime because of over-moralism and a fakeness around religious piety and righteousness. And I think that the Ministry of Education just doesn't have any moral authority to go into the topic, particularly if they begin from a stance of religiosity as opposed to adolescent realities. Kajaba told us that the teenage body is an exploring body. We have to begin there from the realities of the teenagers. But also I think an important question is the question around young men who father these children, and teachers, and like the entire system in Uganda. It's a systemic question. It cannot be solved today. Jimmy told us it's history. It's historical. It's not today. It's a deeper issue. And so I think for me that, again, it's one of the many crises. It's a symptom of the bigger problem we have in Uganda, which is just a failure to manage our own issues. And I think that the managers have to go. I keep, underlining the current managers cannot do the job. They should go.
The issue of freedom of thought, even as we express our opinions right now on this platform, State of the Nation, even as we suggest that the current managers of our country must go, we are in spaces that have been really diminished for us to even have these thoughts or these conversations. Mr. Kakwenza Rukirabasaija was first kidnapped, then he was sent to jail by the courts of law. And he was sent to jail even though most people knew that he was kidnapped by SFC or by people who are not identified. We know that the SFC as an arm of the army is not structurally, it's not legally structured within the UPDF. We do not know, at least according to the Constitution of Uganda. But many people have said that they are the folks who kidnapped Mr. Kakwenza Rukirabasaija were from the SFC, and they were commanded by Mr. Muhoozi Kainerugaba. They call him a general. How are we going to navigate the issue of freedom of thought? And before we delve into that question, I think I'm going to show a video about how the people who look the supposedly some of the folks who arrested Kakwenza are in the same group of army officers who protect the president. And that's how they look like when they are in uniform. We have no evidence that they were part of the SFC, but there has been a speculation that they were part of the CFC. That's how they behave. Very highly trained. They seem to be very highly trained. But one questions how, if they are really that disciplined, why they would kidnap someone, throw him in jail, and up to today not let him out, even when the reporters suggested that he was indeed tortured. Mr. Sentong, let me start with you. You have been following this thing a lot. I know Stella has been following it as well. We have all been following this a lot. What do we need to do? Mr. Kakwenza is still in jail. The prison's medical report, of course, reveals that he was tortured. I saw your stare on Twitter. Did Kakwenza injure himself in the process of being arrested? You're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know where to start or how to address your question of what exactly.
I have lost you. We have lost you. We have lost you. We have lost you. Do you hear me? We have lost you. It seems. It seems we have lost you. All right. All right. This is a. It seems we have lost him. It seems we have lost him. All right. He will return. He will return. Dr. Stella, your thoughts?
Right. So you asked, did Kakwenza injure himself? And you said, what should we do?
Yeah, of course. That was. I was asking that specifically to Dr. Spire because that was the stare he did, or the joke, or the sort of stare.
Right. So the satirical piece that that Jimmy produced, that Dr. Sentongo produced, is not a joke. Sadly,
Yeah.
the former president of the Uganda Law Society, Mr. Shinobe, on TV made similar statements, and he shamelessly went ahead to defend them. And so I think part of the absurdity is that, again, in Uganda, we have empathetic Ugandans, and then we have Ugandans who will make a mockery and a foolery out of the suffering and torture of Ugandans. They're like clear distinctions. Currently, what's happening with Kakwanza Rukira Bashaija is a highlighting of the repression, high levels of repression that the Ugandan state has taken on. I think for me, a country where the leaders who own guns and resources and everything that works for power are scared of a person with a pen and ideas is a very scary place to be in. A Uganda where only praise singers are allowed to exist is a dangerous Uganda to be in. I can first keep quiet and allow Jimmy to go ahead since we now have him, if that is okay, Henry.
I think it's fine with you proceeding.
Okay, because I mean, you had a very specific question for him, which the question about did Kakwenza hurt himself? If it were not a reality voiced by Chinobe, the former president of Uganda Law Society, it would be funny. It would be funny, but it's not funny.
I actually do have the audio. I mean, the video for by Mr. Chinobe.
But I think for me, don't even play Chinobe, because what Chinobe says is a replica of what so many others who are defending the torture of government critics are saying. So Chinobe is just one out of a whole pool of idiots who are captives themselves and beholden by the captor Museveni, to the point that they will totally rid their heads of brain and take on a zombie sort of brainless status where anything goes, including the torture of mere critics. I think for me that the question about what should we do is important. Kakwenza's experiment is an experiment to induce fear, intimidation. If you keep talking like this, if you keep making a mockery of the power holders, we shall beat you, we shall come to your homes, we shall break your houses, we shall break your bones. and the police will not be able to identify you, but they can't do anything. The police will make promises of producing you in court, and the police will fail. The prison services will not be able to stick by the Prisons Act, which talks about admitting a prisoner who has got evidence of torture. The courts of law will break the very laws that run them. We have the Human Rights Endorsement Act, I think of 2019, which clearly says that a suspect that is brought before a magistrate or a judge or any other judicial officer with evidence of torture on their body, that case should be considered a nullity. There's no case there if a suspect in the docks clearly has evidence of torture. And Kakwenza didn't just have evidence of torture on his body. He actually asked the chief magistrate of Uganda Road Court, where he was eventually produced, to give him relief because of the torture he had endured. However, because of the sort of authoritarian, militant, brutal, violent regime in which Ugandans are forced to live today, the judges, the courts, the police, the prisons are all held captive. And they use the metaphor of a castrated man, that Museveni has totally castrated all the male institutions in Uganda. Our men are without balls. Our men babalawa, mwenamwena basajja ba Uganda babalawa. Institutions za Uganda ezandibadde n'eddume zonna bazilawa. In other words, that the institutions that would safeguard the rights of a suspect. Let's say Kakwenza was actually a criminal, a suspected criminal. He has rights enshrined within our constitution. But the institutions by law that are mandated to protect his rights as a suspect in Uganda have been rendered ballless. And so part of the problem for us who choose to continue using our voices to criticize his power is that when we fall into the hands of those mighty, brutal, violent power holders, there is no longer a safeguard or a safety net where we can clearly know that the law will protect us and we shall get out eventually. So freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, the right to express oneself, a constitutional rights given to us as Ugandans. Sadly, the constitution in Uganda means nothing because we live under a dictatorship. So you said, what should we do? I think the first thing is to resist the intimidation, to resist the fear, to resist self-editing, to resist gagging, because that is what they want us to do. Possibilities of protest, as Jimmy Spire Sentongo discussed a little earlier, it's impossible to go to the streets and protest. It's impossible to organize communities. It's impossible to physically participate in resistance activities. It is dangerous because Kitalia still has space. However, we still have the opportunity of voice and articulation and representation to make our resistance audible, visible, using freedom of expression and thought. And so I think we must work hard to protect these, especially those of us who are dissident writers. If it means standing up in the midst of danger and continuing to do the sort of writing that we do, we have to continue. If it means getting out of the country in order to write, we have to do that. I think that for those of us, such as myself, who value freedom of thought and free expression and refuse to negotiate with abusers of power, our ability to express ourselves, it's become quite dangerous. And I want to salute Dr. Sentongo for the work he's doing using his cartoons, and several other creatives and artists who are speaking boldly truth to power using different media, because it is dangerous. There's a cost to pay, especially when one chooses to remain in Uganda. But I'm also saying that from the examples of such Ugandans who have remained in the country, there is hope that we can still resist and refuse to be compromised. It is dangerous, but it is possible. And so, Jimmy, we look to you Those of us who have run away, like seriously, we look up to you, we salute you, we commend you, we uphold you. I pray for you. I pray for the community of voices, of representers who can speak truth to power, ugly truth to power. And I salute you because what you're doing must be done. It is costly, it is dangerous, but it must be done. We salute you and we uphold you. I pray you're safe, my brother. In terms of Kakwenza Rukira Bashaija, I am worried for the trauma that he has gone through. What we never talk about in the opposition writ largely is the cost we have to pay for the sort of struggle we undertake. Given the divisions and the disunity within the opposition, many times, even our very own in the opposition are attacking us for the sort of work we are doing. Kakwenza has not only been criticized by the power holders, he's also been criticized by a number of people in the opposition, whether it's within political parties or civil society organization or cultural and religious institutions, because of the moralism and the conservativeness and the poor education exposure we have in Uganda. Many people fail to see satire and humor and irony and mockery as alternative figurative modes of communicating truth to power. And I think that poetic license and artistic creative license allow us to speak indirectly to power holders, and they don't know how to respond to us. That is why they arrest us and they beat us up and they detain us. But I think that the truth will prevail and the truth will matter. I have spoken a lot. I think for me, what I want to say is we must keep doing what we must keep doing, even when they beat us up and tear our bones and break our balls and take us to torture chambers. So showing us pictures of SFC must not scare us, because when they went to Kakwenza's house, they were not even dressed in uniform. Sometimes it will not be the SFC. Sometimes it will be the lover you sleep with. It will be the child you're with that will be used to come and try to silence us. And so I think that resistance is mandatory. And for some of us who choose to leave, I chose to leave because I could no longer stay and gag myself. I could no longer stay silent. It became inhuman to rid myself of voice, and I can still speak out when I'm out of Uganda, and I still plan to do so. It's a pity that Kakwenza is in jail. And I can say with a measure of confidence that there are going to be very many more Kakwenzas. I don't think we are prepared enough to respond as Ugandans in the liberation struggle. We're not prepared enough to respond to such provocations, be it legally, legal aid, medical aid, organizing. We haven't organized ourselves well enough. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stella. I'm going to invite Dr. Spire to complete his conversation. Dr. Spire.
Oh, yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I used up my few GBs. You have to pay for that, Henry.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm kidding. You had asked me a question earlier. Did Kakwenza injure himself? And I think it's a rhetorical question, or just to show the irony, also the stupidity of some of the explanations that are given by those that by the oppressors. But I also used it in one of my tweets, just because I was trying to show some of the parallels with what was happening in South Africa during the apartheid era. There are so many people that died in prison, and the explanation that was given was that they slid on a piece of soap in a bathroom, injured themselves, and that's how they died. I know soon we are getting there. You can understand or explain whatever is happening in Uganda in terms of just one concept: legitimacy. Usually a regime will respond it will respond to the citizenry and their action in terms of its understanding of its own legitimacy. In Uganda, I think the government of President Museveni knows that it's not legitimate well, they can say all they say, an election was arranged and they won, but they also understand it's not that they are so foolish not to know what kind of election it was. And when you know that you're running an illegitimate government, you're also in fear. In fact, we shouldn't think that it's only us who are afraid. They are so scared of us. It's just like I wrote about this earlier. The behavior of a thief when he or she breaks into your house. They might show a lot of courage in their behavior, but that's adrenaline in most of the cases. And it's been explained that that's why, in most cases, if you're robbed, you'll find feces in your house somewhere. This is adrenaline at work. The thief is as scared or even more scared than the victim. So the government is scared and they are acting paranoid. They are in suspicion in all spaces that someone is doing something against them. That explains what is happening, how they respond to criticism, how they respond even to small provocations. Like, I don't think, even if it were an insult, being told that you're base, that would be something so huge as to make you treat someone the way Kakwenza has been treated, even if we were to admit that it was an insult. Now, if they respond like that to such provocation, what would happen if it was more than that? I think it's Machiavelli, who for many is considered to be a villain in the fields of political philosophy. He says that a leader should either work to be loved or to be feared. But first try to be loved. If you're loved, then you're lucky. But you cannot guarantee that you're always going to be loved. Love can be given and it can be withdrawn. That's why he says that fear is more reliable for someone who wants to hold on to power, because you can control fear. If you bring that to the government of Museveni in analysis, you see that they know that love, to a large extent, has already been withdrawn. So if they want to hold on to power, then they have to instill fear into the populace. And what is happening to Kakwenza actually might not be so much about Kakwenza, but about certain people wanting to send a message out there to others that if you try anything like this or even more than that, this is how we'll behave. Otherwise, if it had been about the insult, as Dr. Stella has just said, they would have gone through the proper constitutional measures. They would have taken him to court, and it wouldn't have been handled the way it was handled right from the arrest. But the other side of the matter of Kakwenza is, as they say, every cloud has a silver lining. There is some blessing in disguise. It has helped to show us that these words, the language that is used, language as a weapon, it actually hurts. Maybe we were not sure. It had happened to Stella before. I'm sorry, Stella, that I have to laugh. In the case of Stella, that was one of our first sites of learning that words can hurt. These can be looked at as weapons of the weak, as the psychologist James Scott called them. Weak people, everyone in their situation will look for a weapon that they can use, no matter how small that weapon is. As the Baganda say, nyanje kutomira. Atakubalira nawe tomumalira. Yes, trying to swallow as you drown. It seems stupid, but at least you have to put up some fight. So when people resort to insulting, when people resort to ridicule, it's partly because you have stripped them of all the other weapons that they can use. When you respond with such anger, with such violence, as in the case of Kakwenza, you're proving to us that our weapons are actually working. In fact, this has been counterproductive. I talked about this before, that if Muhoozi was doing this, and that's if it's Muhoozi behind it, as I also suspect, if he was doing it to stop people from insulting him or to make people fear him, then he has just worsened it. He has taught many other people that the insults are painful and that they reach him, that even just by tweeting, the first son can know what I feel about him, even if he has blocked me. I think he had already blocked Kakwenza. You're emboldening more people to use that as a weapon. Whenever they want to annoy you, whenever they want to get to you, they will use that. Those of us who didn't know that being called obese was painful, you're seeing so many more people now using the obesity insult. Perhaps before that wouldn't have happened. That's why I'm saying that it's counterproductive, even if they think that this is meant to threaten people. You cannot threaten the entire country. We are different. I admire the courage of Stella, and I was surprised when she took off from the front. Of course, you want to leave, but I've always, sometimes I've seen some of your action, and I'm like, who takes such a risk? The challenge is on me. It's not really on how it's not to say that she's foolhardy, but understanding the environment the way it is, you wouldn't expect any Ugandan to go to the streets with those placards and with fingers. I'm not as brave to use those words. What I'm trying to say is that we were created differently. We have different levels of boldness, of courage. Some is acquired, some is within our genes. Even if you intimidate so many people, those that are so easily intimidated, there will be others to come up. There will always be others. There is no context in human history where people are being oppressed and you did not have any section of the population rising up, even when they've used worse means than the Museveni regime is using. I think under apartheid it was worse, but you still had even children, school children, standing up before tanks to express themselves, to assert their rights, to assert their freedoms. I think if the intention was to scare, some people will get scared, and you're increasingly getting more people sending you messages, no, you should also take off, you should also leave the country. Yes, sometimes you consider it, and I envy Stella now seated there knowing that nothing is going to happen to her. If she was here, maybe she would be looking over her shoulder. Yeah, I envy her, but yeah, I understand. Many people will get scared, but not all of us are going to get scared. Steve Biko said is one of my one of the people that inspire me a lot. Yeah, he said that the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed.
Yeah.
For as long as they can control your mind on how you can think, how you can react to their threats or to their actions, then they have you in their hands. I'm quite sure they are monitoring social media to see how people are responding to the arrest of Kakwenza and how he's being treated, to see if there are signs of fear, to see if there are signs of withdrawal, and that makes them thump their chests. What should we do? It's part of what I've said, but we cannot announce everything that we should do. I can only say that everyone should use what is within their means. I'll draw cartoons. I said I don't have the courage of Stella to go to the streets. I think I'll be trembling there even if I held a placard. I try to hold a placard, but just give me a piece of paper to draw any cartoon. I'll be able to do that. And many of us have other possibilities, other talents. Today's space has been expanded for expression, and it's making it very difficult for these oppressive regimes. They block one channel, another is created. And people are so creative. This is an elderly government that is dealing with young people that are more creative, that have a better understanding of working with new spaces that are being created. So there is hope still, even within the fear.
There is hope even within the fear. Thank you so much, Dr. Sentongo. Mr. Kajova, having had both submissions, the question then is for you, how do we interact with the notion of someone who has been implicated in kidnapping a citizen, pretending or purporting to be the chief diplomat that saves another citizen to return to their country? And I'm speaking about yesterday's action where Mr. Muhoozi Kainerugaba was seen playing diplomat in Rwanda. How do we respond to that? How should we interpret that? How should we interact with such scenario?
Thank you, Henry. You know, it is rather challenging to be on a panel with Stella and Spire when you are having a conversation about such issues where they are frontline, or if you like, household names. Now, with as little credibility as I have in terms of these issues of expression, you know, first of all, I commend those people that, you know, I consider myself a backbencher, you know, in very many things, and an admirer of those that lead the way. I respect and I admire and envy. So thank you for what you do. Now, to your question, Henry, Augustine once said, Saint Augustine, you know, one of the, they say, fathers of Western thought, you know, and a very powerful phenomenon in Christianity and other spheres. He once said that even those who commit grave injustices, while they might appear to not care about justice, they also care about justice. It is just that they care about their own version of what that justice is. And so they have their own version of what that justice is. One man in Uganda sang a song, I think that was, one of my favorite artists in Uganda, Prince Paul Job Kafero, now the late. In his song, Walumbe Zaya, I think it is Walumbe Zaya, he gets to a certain part and says, he talks about how Walumbe, whatever you might translate that to be, gives almost what you would call, you know, instills in certain people the ability to take other people's lives with ease, you know. And so they take away other people's lives as if they don't have people they care about or lives of their own. The reality of the matter is, even a murderer, if they're on the other side of the barrel of the gun, they plead for their life. And so it therefore means that they do not necessarily take yours because they feel it is okay for life to be taken. But there are a number of reasons why they might take yours, probably in the balance when they carry out their assessment, in the balance of possibilities. First of all, probably your humanity, according to them, does not count. Or in the balance of possibilities, while you're human, you're not as human as they are, or probably your right to live or your right to a decent existence does not measure up to whatever their priorities are. And so I have seen very many people who are very violent. I know a certain gentleman, certain man who used to beat his wife. He used to batter his wife. He was our neighbor growing up. eventually had daughters who grew up and got married. And his daughter came back having been battered by the man, by her husband. And this man was very angry, and he was determined to attack the son-in-law for battering his daughter, as if it were that his wife who is not someone's daughter, or so these things happen. So how do we deal with it? It is a question of priorities. I think what happens in contexts such as these is you cannot dehumanize someone whose humanity you've taken into consideration. I think what happens is you really have to, first of all, interact with someone not as a human being such as yourself, but as a concept or an idea or a representative of something to which you are opposed. And so how do we interact with these people? Well, it is the human condition. Some of the people who hate being lied to the most are the most terrible liars. It is the human. It is the human problem. Someone once I read, I don't remember where, but once I read somewhere, someone said that that the character trait, I don't remember that statement, but the statement basically said that sometimes the things that we hate the most are exactly the things that we also do sometimes. Again, sometimes. Like I told you, I was once a part of a certain tradition that prized itself as being persecuted, but one of the number one things that they did is to alienate anyone that disagreed with them. So in one of our deliberations, one time I asked them a question: you who talk about others as being persecutors, how different are you from them when you exactly do the same thing? So it is that is the challenge that I see. So how do we interact with these people? Well, in as far as whatever their purposes are in these mediations, those purposes are important. Everyone will fight for what they consider important. Everyone, in some way. Some more than most, some more outspoken than others, but every human being at some point will fight for something that they consider important. And so probably they do not, if I take good care of I don't know, when Jimmy, when he comes to, let's say he happens to pass by Canada, and I offer to pick him at the airport, drive him to wherever he wants to be, make sure he gets everything he needs, feed him, and make sure his life is as comfortable as possible. And tomorrow you call me and tell me, Henry, you call me and tell me, David, I'm coming to Ottawa, but would you mind dropping me, at the Parliament Hill? And I tell you, I don't have time. It doesn't say that I do not have a caring persona inside of me. It simply tells you about my value towards you. So I think actions tell us about these people's values towards certain priorities, and what we see and what we know is that people such as Kakwenza and such like the Steras of this world, the Jimmies are such the kind of people, according to their definition, who do not deserve a right, to the most fundamental, to the most fundamental.
Are you suggesting that Mr. Muhoozi Kainerugaba is a pious person?
I don't know Mr. Muhoozi. I can't comment on the person of Mr. Muhoozi. I don't know him, and I have never interacted with him. I don't know whether the allegations against him are true, and I don't know what you mean by being a pious person. First of all, because that is also very important. But I think the quality of being. Huh?
I can see David wants to come back home.
But if piousness is an absolute state, it's if we are looking at it in those terms, then probably he doesn't qualify. But to some people, he does qualify. I say this with a cognizance that I once was talking to someone who felt that I was an amazing human being. And I told them, do not be so sure about my amazingness, because to some person, I am the most terrible human being who has ever existed.
Right.
So, however, if indeed it is true that Mr. Muhoozi was so pissed about someone commenting about his weight, which really, I don't know why it would be an insult. But anyway, if it is indeed true, anyway, I understand no one wants to be corrected, especially when they know they are wrong. So if it is indeed true that, like it probably is, he commanded the torture of a human being because of a tweet, then it is one of the most absurd things I've ever had to interact with, because I do not understand.
Because of a tweet by the person he blocked.
How a disagreement on Twitter can translate into an international human rights conversation. I marvel in my mind that we have an international crisis, human rights crisis, because someone was annoyed on Twitter. For me, that, it baffles me. You know, and to be considered pious or not, you need to be human first. But some people don't qualify.
Dr. Stella, as you wrap up, let us wrap up this conversation. As you wrap up, how do you respond to that? How do you plead?
Right. I mean, I think from 7 o'clock when we started, what stands out, whether we talk about the fuel crisis or we talk about teenage pregnancy or torture or, you know, whatever crisis Uganda is facing, I wonder how much more we can endure. The elasticity, I mean, Jimmy referred to hope amidst fear. I don't know how much more Ugandans can endure. And I think part of the question for me is when is this madness ending? When is it ending? It's not a question of, you know, will it end? How will it end? Why? All the other questions are answerable, but the question of how much more we can endure as a people bothers me, because I don't know what will happen next. When everything has collapsed, you know, your eyes stop seeing, your ears stop hearing, your nose stops, everything has failed. The brain is what went first, you know, the executive, the eyes, I don't know what the eyes of the state, like everything has failed.
Judiciary.
I don't know what is sustaining us as Uganda, as an entity called Uganda today. And it is worrisome to me. It concerns me a lot. It keeps me awake that in spite of all these crises, one after another, sometimes 20 crises parallel to each other at the same time, Ugandans keep going. Our ability to swim above the shit, excuse my German, but yeah, is amazing. And I think the next project for thought is what sustains us and what keeps us going, and the love for home, the commitment to Uganda What are we committing ourselves to it? What is it? How much more can we continue like this is a question that I think begs an answer. So I'm not finishing with any finishing, but I'm finishing with more questions, because I think for me, my biggest contribution towards the world is my ability to question and keep questioning and keep asking. And the questions around Uganda are just so many. If I had a student that I was supervising today and they were in Uganda, I would really want them to go onto a journey for the next 5 years. What is going to hold us? What holds us together? Because how does one continue? How do you go on with all this trauma, with all these failings? And it perhaps is not a very good note to end on in terms of, practical everyday living, to end with questions. But I think for me, as a thinker, as a scholar, as that is what I love to do, the questions remain so many. Uganda is such a productive site for questioning and knowledge and thinking right now. If nothing else, I think I will miss that ability to have all these amazing questions of nikyo kibaddewo kakati ki ekiddako kakati like the questions are just so many, and every day when I was writing before going to bed, I'd have all these amazing questions, because Uganda has become a wonder, a marvel, a mystery. Like, it's enigmatic. I think, although I'm away, Jimmy, I promise you I'm not away. I'm there. My heart beats with Uganda. I follow everything to answer the question, what next now? Kyekiddako. Like, byonna biganye naye oba okyali awo ng'era wabaawo ekitulikabe pa oba olowooza biweddeyo nga pu naye ekyo kiraki ate buli ekivayo ky'amaanyi. And I think the political question, until it's answered, right? Until the political question is answered, none of these ones, these others are small things. The big question is the politics and governance of our country. I thank you all, and I wish you a good week.
The questions never end. Of course, we always end with questions because we need to continue interrogating the issues that are affecting our society. Dr. Spire, your thoughts as we wrap up?
Yeah. Like Dr. Stella says, and as also seems to be the tone in David's submission, well, at certain points you feel it's too much. You feel like, what else? You ask yourself, what am I sacrificing myself for? And when you get these so many voices around you, or people telling you, no, these people, they are so deeply entrenched, don't think you can do anything. They are everywhere within the system. And well, you're encouraged with the awareness that every oppressor will want to show you that they are so huge, they are so mighty, and they are all over. Their presence has to be imagined in every space. You have to think that they are omnipresent. You have to think that they are this huge-eyed person that sees everywhere, even in your privacy. Again, back to Steve Biko. He said that he was cursing his fellow South Africans at the time. He was saying, why would they complain? Okay, they keep quiet in public spaces about what was happening, and they go back home and they kick doors of their toilets, cursing government. I think we are also at that point where so many people are cursing in private. Sometimes I go through social media comments and I see the number of people who are now handling what we are facing. They are putting everything in the hands of God. And you say,
Your internet is not stable. Your internet is not stable.
Now, I'm encouraged that not all efforts are. Are we together?
We lost you for a moment there, but yes,
sorry about
we
that.
now hear you. Yeah, we now hear you.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was saying that every contribution that has been made, at least it has had some impact. When you're fighting a huge thing like a whale or an elephant, you might not imagine the impact of the arrow that you have hit at the ear, at the tail, or at whatever part of its body. But ultimately, all this weakens it. The contribution of Dr. Besigye, of Semogerere before him, of Chagulanyi, of the Stella Nyanzis, and other players that we might not even know about. There are so many people who are doing small things quietly. I'm quite sure that it has had an impact. When you see the behavior, you observe the behavior of government today, it's not the same behavior as in 2021, as in 2016, as in 1996. Why is it changing? It's changing in reaction to the pressure around it. This increase, the increase in the violence that we see around us, the kidnaps that we witnessed last year, all that is communicating something. There is too much pressure. It's increasing. It's Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist, who said that you cannot fasten a chain around the ankle of someone without finding the other part of the other end of the chain fastened around your neck. These people are also trapped in their own actions. They are also trapped in the system that they have created. But sometimes you go so much up a hill, and when you look back, you say, no, I'm not going to go back down. Let me just continue climbing. We might get this impression of a government that is too strong, still intact, and cannot be challenged, or we can't do anything about it, but we have already done too much. There is so much that Dr. Stella has demystified through her weapons of her own methods. There is so much that Kakwenza has taught us. There is so much that we learned from Dr. Besigye when he came in with his defiance. There is so much that we have learned from Chagulanyi and his music, and being able to realize that these people can even fear information, messages in a song, messages in poems, messages in books. Initially, we thought these things do not matter. Why do they seem to matter now? There is much more pressure than they've had before, or maybe to put it differently, this pressure is accumulating. We may not know, as Dr. Stella said, when the tree is falling, but I think it's close to that point. Maybe we should be singing like in Animal Farm. Sooner or later, the day is coming. Tyrant man shall be overthrown. Yeah, that's the hope we need, although we are not quite sure, although the situation seems ambiguous. Thank you.
What he says it? You're muted.
But in 1 minute, David.
Bw'olaba empologoma etandise okweraliikirira obugabi, omanya empologoma erabika eba ekaddiye oba ebeera ndwadde. One of the things I know about powerful people who not only are powerful but are confident in their own power, they don't seem to feel the need to show it. But when you begin seeing people trying to show their power, even in very, I'm sorry to say, useless things, or not that very useful things, then it tells you about how they understand their power. And if anything, history has taught us. I love history. Everything you see when you're a good student of history, you realize that there's nothing new we are seeing. There's nothing new in the history of authoritarian regimes. And whatever we are seeing, when we look back in history, We have seen it, and there were signs. And so the prophets can begin prophesying, and fortune tellers can begin telling. But the reality of the matter is, our captors have a lot more days behind them than they have ahead of them. And so, while the works of certain people might seem like they do not matter, nze nakulandya akatogo bw'okava kumu oba n'osobola okukalya. And the sugar cane is also sweetest at the joint. So we keep eating on until we get to the joint. Omuntu amanyi okulya ekikajjo takitandikira wansi, tutandikira waggulu ne tudda awo wakatikkati ne tulyoka tukkirira wansi. The more you chew, the sweeter it gets. And so in that regard, I do not believe that there is any such thing as wasted efforts. If anything, I think I said that the last time we were here when Mr. Kakwenza had just been taken. We didn't know where he was at the time. We soon found out that he was in police custody. Of course, we speculated, but we have that at some point there was just Semwogerere daring to challenge. Then we thought after Semwogerere what would be next. Then we had another four. I'm only mentioning what you would call key figures in that sense. Then we had Kizza Besigye. Everyone wondered what would happen after Besigye. While Besigye is not yet, while it is not yet after Besigye because he's still here, now we have Kyagulanyi. So the regime has Kyagulanyi and Besigye to contend with. At some point, we only had, I remember when Stella first wrote, I was living in Luzira at the time, and I started hearing of Dr. Stella Nyanzi. I was living in Luzira at the time. So, bakuyisanga wao nga tukulaba. It is not funny, but so if intimidation would meant that people like Stella would stop talking, then we have the Kakwenzas, we have the Spies, and so many people. And so if one thing intimidation should teach us is that intimidation doesn't necessarily stop people from doing what you don't want them to do. It only helps them to come up with more creative solutions of doing that and more. And so I am optimistic in one regard. I am a very pessimistic man when it comes to Uganda. But I'm very optimistic in one sense. That gives me confidence is the young lady who called me that once thought that everything was well. But recently, towards the election last year, this young lady called me and told me enough is enough. A few years before that, she was among the many that I used to know who thought that, well, things were in order. And so for me, if nothing happens, while it appears that nothing is happening, I think a lot is happening. People are getting more informed, people are getting more educated, and people are becoming more fearful. There is power in people who fear. There is power in fear. Because like a thief might shoot you because they're scared, the population might do what you least expect because they fear you, one, but much more than that, they fear what might happen if you continue being there amidst their fear. So I am optimistic in that regard, that the Ugandan experiment so far has almost the Ugandan experiment has so far left a lot to be desired, but I think every day that passes, we are getting closer to the dream that probably some of our forefathers had for what the Uganda could look like. Thank you for indulging me this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kajoba. Thank you so much, Dr. Spire. Thank you so much, Dr. Stella. Mwebale nnyo mwebale ddala okubeera nga mutwegattako to have these conversations. They are pertinent conversations. This is the role that we play in the big battle. We are a very small piece of the puzzle, but I think we are an important part of the bigger puzzle. And it's a privilege to serve with people like you. It's a privilege to have you come to the state of the nation and educate, even amidst having conversations, because there is a lot to learn in having these roundtable conversations. That is what we used to have nga tugenze mu byoto. Simanyi oba abantu bakyafuna ebyoto ennaku zino ne batula ne bateesa ku nsonga eza family, ez'eggwanga. Those spaces are continuously diminishing, and that's why we must create spaces like the State of the Nation. I want to thank every single person who has been following us today, those who have been courageous enough to write comments. Mr. Chistu Samuel, you have written so many comments. Few have been highlighted, some haven't been highlighted. Village Warrior, thank you so much for all the comments that you have shared. Ndagire Remy, it was a pleasure having you. Mr. Chris Namakola, thank you so much for your submissions. Basingwa Maxwell Chiza, thank you so much for following. Maria Ukirwa, thank you so much for following. And everyone else who has been able to join us today, thank you so much. We shall continue having these conversations. Of course, it doesn't end. Again, we would like to mourn with the country as well as the family of Dr. Emmanuel Tumusiime Mutebile. Would like to mourn with you and the country. Tusuubira nti nno abawala bagenda kwongera okubeera nti nno not just nti basoma naye nti they are also welcomed within those spaces. There are so many things that have been talked about today, and I cannot thank you enough for everything that you do on a regular basis. Have a great Sunday. Have a great week. This is the State of the Nation. My name is Henry Sally. Following, we are on YouTube. Follow us on YouTube, Twitter if you can, and other spaces where we are. Look for Henry Sally or African Alumni Association. God bless you. Have a good Sunday.
This is the State of the Nation. Ibifa Uganda. We are deliberate, we are reasonable, we are uncensored. The State of the Nation.